To die in Tennessee. Fade in. Exterior, keelboat, day. First week on the Missouri. Men sweat over the oars, the keelboat moving upstream, followed by two pirogues, one white, one brown. In the brown pirogue, Frenchmen sing a rowing song.
In the spring of 1804, in obedience to the orders of President Thomas Jefferson, we set out to follow the great western rivers to the Pacific Ocean. A literary pursuit, Jefferson said, for the advancement of scientific knowledge. In truth, we were locked in a race with foreign powers for control of the uncharted lands west of the Mississippi. Mr. Jefferson believed the very survival of our young nation might lie in the balance.
Interior, cabin of keelboat, day, continuous. Red-haired William Clark, 33, sits writing in a journal as Meriwether Lewis, 29, elegant in appearance and manner, takes a chronometer from a mahogany box and winds it with a key. Lewis's black Newfoundland dog lies at his feet.
We hoped to reach the Mandan villages before winter set in. Between there and the Pacific lay a vast expanse unknown to civilized man. Mr. Jefferson had appointed Captain Lewis senior commander, confiding to scientist Robert Patterson that he knew of no one else willing to undertake so perilous an enterprise. Lewis had first volunteered to try for the Pacific at the age of 18. This isn't my story, but his. The story of a terrible wrong, never put right.
The Frenchman's song dies away mid-chorus. The dog rises, intent, sensing trouble. Quill poised, Clark looks up. Exterior, keelboat, day, continuous. At the bow of the keelboat, Frenchman Peter Cruzet, 32, black eye patch, pushes a floating log aside with a setting pole. Looks uneasily at dark clouds rolling down river toward them. He calls out with a French accent.
Captain Clark.
Clark emerges from the cabin, takes in the situation. Overhanging bluffs to starboard, pirogues making for a debris-littered beach to the larboard.
Put into the larboard shore.
On the upper deck, Sergeant Nathaniel Pryor, 31, turns the tiller. Cruzet chops a hand to starboard.
Non, tenez le doigt. Le doigt. Snag, snag.
The boat catches, swinging broadside in the current. Logs and debris hammering it.
Labrador is dead in the water. Turner! Turner will be dashed to pieces.
Flash of lightning, clap of thunder. The boat slips free. A sudden gale of wind sweeps it onto the rocks under an overhanging bluff. Limestone falls, shattering on the deck, grazing Alexander Willard, 26. He touches a hand to his forehead, notes blood on his hand.
Starboard oarsman over the side!
Clatter of discarded oars. Moses Reed, 25, stands frozen as his fellow oarsmen vault over the rail, scrabbling for footholds on wet rocks, struggling to push the boat free.
Go, Reed, go!
Reed eases himself over the side.
Setting poles!
Men seize poles, setting the tips against the bluff, pushing. The boat floats free, men clambering aboard. Willard, his head bleeding, extends a pole to William Bratton, 25, in the water, hauls him aboard. Reed stands on the rocks, watching in alarm as the boat drifts away.
Reed! Swim, we'll pull you out!
Reed can't swim, sir.
My God. Hang on! We'll come back for you after this blows over!
Reed disappears from sight behind an outcropping. Interior, cabin of keelboat, night. Clark lies in his bunk, Lewis at his desk, writing by the light of a candle lantern.
We damn near lost the boat today. Our provisions and equipment, our rifles, our gunpowder.
Lewis gives him a sober look, caps his inkpot.
But for your command of the situation, our mission would have ended before it was properly begun.
Lewis blows out the candle and settles himself in his bunk. Rippling of water. Moonlight slants through the windows. Exterior, on shore, night, continuous. Campsite on a sandbar under an overhanging bluff. Water flows towards sleeping men, campfires. Sand arose under a fallen tree, roots like a great white spider in the moonlight. Dislodged, it eases into the river, thumps against the keelboat, turns in the current, and is gone. Reed wakes up, sits up. A campfire hisses, smokes, goes out.
What the hell?
Sergeant Charles Floyd, 21, stands guard. Startled, he notes water flowing around his feet. A rock falls, dirt sifting down. He looks up the bluff.
All men up. Break camp. The river's changing course.
Men scramble to their feet, cursing, gathering bedding, rifles and equipment, sprinting for the boats, heaving things in, clambering aboard. Floyd unties the mooring cable and runs splashing for the keelboat. Pryor and York, 30, a burly black man, haul him aboard.
Raise anchor, man the oars!
Clatter of oars. Cruzet takes his place at the bow, peers into moonlit water, pushes a floating log aside with a setting pole. On shore, campfires wink out as a large section of bluff falls, burying the campsite. John Shields, 34, leans into his oar.
God almighty, the bluff fell in. We come near to being buried alive.
The river, she is like jealous woman, stabbed you with knife while you asleep. Is not for nothing they call her the troubled waters.
Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Barefoot men sweat at the tow rope, hauling the keelboat through shallows past a turbulent chute of water. Reed's foot slips on a stone. He goes to his knees with a muttered curse. Shield notes blood on the rope, steals a look at his hand, raw and bleeding.
John Shields would refer to those first days on the river as the honeymoon. Few surprises, nothing you can't handle. Then you begin to realize what it is you've married yourself to.
Exterior, campsite, night. Clark sits eating with Lewis. An outburst of laughter from a group gathered around Patrick Gass, 33. The Kentucky Nine form another group, cousins Pryor and Floyd, Shields, Bratton, brothers Reuben and Joseph Field, 32 and 31, John Coulter, 28, George Gibson, 27, George Shannon, 18. Floyd spears a bite-sized piece of meat from Pryor's plate with his knife and pops it into his mouth, looks at Pryor and grins, chews with great relish.
Among our volunteers were 9 civilians recruited for their skills as hunters and woodsmen. Sergeants Nathaniel Pryor and his young cousin Charles Floyd were the first to sign on.
York, the party's only black man, takes his plate from cook Peter Weiser, 23. Starts toward Gass's group. Gass stops him with a look. As Floyd catches York's eye, Pryor snakes Floyd's meat onto his own plate. Floyd moves over to make room for York, who gives him a grateful look and sits. Floyd looks at his empty plate, looks at Pryor's plate. Grinning, he spears his meat and returns it to his plate. Willard and Sergeant John Ordway, 29, sit eating and talking with a quiet air of camaraderie. Ordway leans forward, says something. Willard laughs.
Sergeant Ordway and Alexander Willard came from the same part of New Hampshire. Ordway would soon be forced to make a difficult choice between duty and friendship.
Lewis sets his plate aside, looks at Clark. They exchange smiles. Lewis sits gazing reflectively into the fire.
I first met Lewis when he was assigned to my company in 1795.
Exterior, parade ground. Day, flashback sequence. Clark watches Sergeant Hawkins march the company in close, order drill. Notes Lewis approaching, long stride, full dress uniform.
I looked up and there he was in all his splendor. Virginia gentry. Thomas Jefferson's godson. My God, he looked like a wine glass amongst a bunch of tin cups.
Ensign Meriwether Lewis, reporting for duty, sir.
Hawkins notes men stealing musing looks at Lewis.
Eyes front.
Have we met? I seem to recall...
I was at Greenville, sir, when Little Turtle and the other chiefs set their hands to the treaty.
Himself stealing a look at Lewis, Hawkins barks at the men.
God damn it, I said eyes front.
Interior, officers' quarters, night, later. Clark lies on his bunk, watching Lewis hang his uniform coat on a peg, fussing over it, draping the sleeves precisely.
I understand you're the younger brother of General George Rogers Clark.
Yes, all my brothers were officers in the war. 2 gave their lives.
My father was commander of one of the first regiments raised in Virginia. I was but 5 when he died. I remember a uniform coat, blue with red facing and buttons, shiny buttons. As the oldest son, I was heir to his estate. It was expected I, too, would become a planter.
Lewis settles himself in his bunk. Firelight flickers on the walls.
They say you mounted a fallen officer's horse and soon commanded fallen timbers.
You take me for a hero? I was so weak in the knees I could barely mount the horse.
Isn't that what a hero is, sir? Weak in the knees, but doing what he knows to be done?
That fallen officer? He was my bunkmate. The British had incited the Indians to attack us. We were ordered to take command of the front guard. We found ourselves pinned down in a maze of fallen timbers.
Exterior, battlefield, day, Clark's account. Brightly uniformed men huddle behind fallen trees. Clark looks up as Lieutenant Henry Tolles, 33, mounts his horse. Their eyes meet. Tolles draws his sword, raises it.
Charge! Rout 'em out!
As men rise and move forward, an Indian, face garish with white war paint, rises from behind a fallen tree and levels a musket on Tolles. Clark takes quick aim and fires. The Indian's musket discharges flame and smoke as he goes down. Struck, Tolles topples face down from his horse. Clark runs, seizes the reins, steadies Tolles' skittish horse. Clark goes down on his haunches, lays a hand on Tolles' shoulder.
Sir? Lieutenant?
Clark turns Tolles over. His face has been blown away.
God, Lieutenant.
A musket ball strikes a timber, spraying Clark with rotting wood. He looks up, sees men wavering, starting to fall back. Clark rises, mounts Tolles' horse, raises his rifle, and thrusts it forward.
God damn it, you heard the lieutenant! Charge!
Clark urges his horse forward, leaping a fallen timber. Men hesitate, then follow. Indians rise from the timbers, firing muskets. Sergeant Eli Edmondson staggers and goes down, red blossoming on white under his jacket. Exterior, battlefield, 2 days later, Clark's account. The wounded cry out as men load them into wagons. Clark walks among the fallen, a kerchief tied over his face. He goes down on one knee and looks at Sergeant Edmondson. Closes Edmondson's unseeing eyes.
General Wayne lay 2 days in his tent, nursing his gout before issuing an order to bring in the wounded. When I found Sergeant Edmondson, his body was still warm. He'd lain 2 days and 2 nights on the field, alone and dying.
Clark notes 2 young men, little more than boys, hacking out a grave with bayonets and bare hands. Rising, they assess the grave, then look in consternation at a body, rigid limbs extending as though in some grotesque dance.
There's been no order to bury the dead.
But he's our brother, sir.
He won't fit, lads. You're obliged to break his bones.
Interior, officers' quarters, night, present time. Firelight flickers on the walls. Silence.
You may want to reconsider the army, Lewis. My brother, George Rogers, bought on credit to feed and clothe his men. He's received no reimbursement. Even his back wages have gone unpaid.
But General Clark is a hero. I heard he took Vincennes with 176 men.
The world isn't always kind to its heroes, Lewis.
Crackling of the fire.
Long winter nights talking in our quarters. I never expected how much I'd come to care for Lewis. That spring I resigned my commission and went back to Kentucky.
Interior, East Room, the President's house, day. Petit, Thomas Jefferson's French valet, leads Clark to a large, sparsely furnished room. Lewis sits at a desk writing. Super, Washington, 7 years later.
In 1801, Lewis, now a captain in the 1st Infantry, wrote to inform me President Jefferson had requested his services as personal secretary. Some months later, while in Washington petitioning for payment of George Rogers' military wages, I called at the President's house.
Mr. William Clark, sir.
Oh my God, Will Clark.
As Clark and Lewis shake hands, Petit fetches a side chair, exits. Clark takes in the room, smiles.
Spacious quarters.
Lewis laughs, lays a hand affectionately on Clark's arm.
Mr. Jefferson and I rattle about like 2 mice in a cathedral. Call this the East Room. Abigail Adams hung her wash here to dry.
Lewis goes to a sideboard and pours 2 whiskeys.
Mr. Jefferson asked me to deliver his State of the Union message to Congress. Seemed to go well enough. Only one of the esteemed senators fell asleep. Tonight, I have a dinner party to oversee.
Lewis hands Clark a whiskey, perches on the edge of his desk.
My dear friend, pray, tell me about yourself.
While in Virginia tending my brother's business, I met a young lady. She entertained me at tea in the garden.
Will Clark sipping tea. He defies imagination.
When Judy Hancock comes of age, I intend to ask the Colonel for his daughter's hand.
God, would that be the eminent Colonel George Hancock?
My apologies, sir. There's a crisis in the kitchen. It's the artichokes. They failed to meet with Mr. Jefferson's approval.
Lewis nods. As Petit exits, Lewis looks at Clark.
Mr. Jefferson and I leave tomorrow for Monticello. Might I prevail on you to call me there?
Exterior, Monticello, day. As a liveried servant takes his horse, Clark looks up wonderingly at the elegant facade of Monticello. Interior, Monticello, day, continuous. Petit leads Clark to the library, where Lewis and Thomas Jefferson, 59, wearing carpet slippers, are intent on a map spread out on an octagon table.
Mr. William Clark.
Mr. Clark, Captain Lewis informs me you drew maps for the army. I'm told General Wayne thought them uncommonly accurate. Come, tell us what you think of Arrowsmith's map.
Clark looks at the map with interest, but for a single line indicating the Rocky Mountains, the area from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast is largely blank.
Terra incognita. The unknown land. What will we find there, Mr. Clark? Mastodons and other creatures long thought extinct? Perhaps an all-water route to the Pacific?
The Indians speak of the shining mountains, sir.
Arrowsmith foresees them as several low ridges. Daniel Cox predicted easy passage of half a day.
Jefferson turns to the window and stands looking out, hands clasped behind his back.
Great Britain must not be permitted to lay claim to Louisiana. We'd be forever limited, and at our backs a world power that has neither forgotten nor forgiven our little war of independence.
Sir, isn't Louisiana a French possession?
Napoleon is intent on conquering Europe. He doesn't have the resources to defend Louisiana.
Jefferson and Lewis exchange glances.
By common usage, the first nation to explore a region has claim to it. If a party from the United States were to proceed overland and descend the Columbia, Oregon, too, might be ours. Imagine it, Mr. Clark. Our young republic, a vast nation extending from Atlantic to Pacific.
My God, it would more than double our size, give us access to 2 oceans.
Laying a hand on Lewis's shoulder, Jefferson returns his attention to the map. Talking, he traces a line from St. Louis to the Bay of the Columbia.
Lewis had grown up in sight of Monticello. Jefferson often invited the boy to visit by reflecting the sun on a mirror. There was an easy familiarity between them, like father and son. That's why it's difficult to understand how, in the end, Jefferson could have so misjudged Lewis.
Interior, George Rogers' house, day. Clark and George Rogers Clark, looking older than his 44 years, sits reading their mail. Laprobe tucked about his legs, cane hooked over the arm of his chair. George Rogers puts down his letter, watches Clark read.
Your young friend, Lewis, is it?
Yes, he informs me Napoleon has sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States.
Clark smiles at George Rogers' look of astonishment, offers him the letter.
There's more. Congress has authorized an expedition to the Pacific, with Captain Lewis chosen to command it.
As though summoned, George Rogers' old black servant, Cupid, appears and stands waiting expectantly. George Rogers is intent on reading Lewis's letter.
A bottle, Cupid.
Miss Fanny, hide them.
Aye. Doesn't my sister hide the whiskey every time she comes to visit? But you know where she hides it, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Lewis asks that you seek out volunteers. Good hunters. Unmarried men accustomed to the woods. My God. He's asking to be his co-commander. He says you'll be given a captain's commission. You've already made up your mind about this, haven't you?
Clark looks at George Rogers and smiles.
This isn't one of Jefferson's dinner parties. Lewis has no experience commanding men in the field.
All the more reason I join him.
Do you realize the hardships, the dangers of it?
Did it ever stop George Rogers, Clark?
Aye. And look where it's gotten me. A pauper, dependent on the kindness of family and friends, beset with rheumatism from excesses I endured.
Cupid reappears with bottle and glasses, a dark arm dusted white with flour.
Hit it in the flour barrel again. Oh, did she?
Yes, sir.
Exterior, on the Ohio, day. Lewis looks on as Coulter and Shannon cut through a rocky shoal with shovels, men straining at a tow rope, others pushing, inching the boat forward.
Lewis descended the Ohio in a keelboat, especially built in Pittsburgh for our journey. We'd never seen the Ohio as low as it was that summer. Lewis was much delayed arriving at Clarksville.
Exterior, shore of the Ohio, day. Clark and Lewis stand on a patch above the keelboat, shaking hands. Lewis's crew has hunkered down on shore, with the exception of Shannon, who is industriously swabbing the deck of the keelboat. Lewis lays a hand affectionately on Clark's arm.
My friend, there's not a man on earth with whom I'd rather share the dangers, fatigues, and honors of this enterprise.
Nor I. I join you with hand and heart.
Clark takes in the keelboat with a critical eye.
There's been naught but small craft on the river. Boat that size. How did you manage it?
The solution to our problem was soon evident. All that was necessary was to pick her up and carry her down.
Clark laughs.
Were you successful in finding volunteers?
7. Good start, fellas.
John Coulter and George Shannon joined up with me on the Ohio. Shannon is but 17, and I had no intention of keeping him on, but he makes himself so useful, I'm now persuaded otherwise.
Clark looks thoughtfully at Shannon.
Come, George Rogers is eager to talk with you. Prepare yourself, he'll try to test you.
Interior, George Rogers' house, day, continuous. Cupid pours 3 whiskeys as George Rogers deals a round of cards face down, then a 3 of spades face up to Clark, a 5 of hearts to Lewis, and a queen of diamonds to himself. Cupid sets the bottle on the table and exits.
I learned this game from a one-eyed Spaniard in St. Louis. Closest count to 21 without going over wins. Ace counts 1 or 11.
George Rogers peeks at his hidden card and grins at Clark, who gives him a guarded look. Clark looks at his hidden card, nods. George Rogers deals him a 10 of diamonds. Lewis looks at his hidden card, nods. George Rogers deals him a 9 of diamonds.
I expect you've heard about Philip Nolan.
Yes. Killed by the Spanish while hunting mustangs on the Brazos River.
George Rogers sets the deck on the table and looks at Clark. With an air of resignation, Clark turns his King of Hearts face up. 23. George Rogers grins.
Aye, and his men rotting in Spanish prisons. The Spanish will likely view the expedition as a threat to their holdings in the New World. I expect they'll try to intercept you.
Lewis turns up a 7 of clubs to reveal a perfect score of 21. Looks at George Rogers.
We have the right of innocent passage by river, son.
Diplomat's words, useless in the field. I'm told they permitted Nolan's servants to bury him after they cut off his ears for delivery to the Spanish governor.
George Rogers turns up his hidden card, an ace of spades.
A 2-card 21 wins over your 3 cards, Captain. Perhaps you'd best be wary of Spanish games.
Exterior, open meadow, day. The Kentucky 9 stands at unpracticed attention. Lewis, in full dress uniform, consults a list. Clark and George Rogers, leaning on a cane, look on. Nearby, York cuts grass with a scythe, but it's plain his main interest is the proceedings at hand.
John Shields?
Here, sir.
I know you're married.
Yes, sir. Captain Clark said you was wanting unmarried men, but he said you're in need of a blacksmith. Joe Field says he'd be right pleased to marry my Nancy if anything happens to me. His brother Reuben also volunteered. If I may say it, sir, neither of them are worthy of her.
The men laugh. Lewis smiles. Hands clasped behind his back, he studies the men.
Gentlemen, I'm authorized to offer you $5 a month and grants of land in the amount of 320 acres.
Joe and Reuben Field steal looks at each other. Grin.
For security reasons, you were informed we'd be ascending the Mississippi to the Lake of the Woods. Our true destination is the Pacific Ocean.
Men exchange startled looks. Shields mutters softly.
God Almighty.
We'll follow the Missouri River to its source, then connect with the Columbia. If events allow, we'll be gone 18 months to 2 years. Although all efforts will be made to ensure your safety, some of you may not return. It's also possible the entire party will be sacrificed in the attempt. Anyone wishing to reconsider may step back out of line.
The Kentucky 9 stand firm. Clark summons York with a look. York drops his scythe and eagerly comes forward.
My servant York. He's got it in his head he wants to volunteer.
Lewis puts a hand on York's shoulder, turns him, studies him with the practiced eye of a slaveholder.
You may be of good use to us.
York grins, flash of white in a black face. Exterior, campwood, day. Log huts, York fetching armloads of firewood. Clark watches Sergeant Ordway march the men in close order drill. Coulter tries to get in step, tromps on Shannon's heel.
We set up winter quarters on the Mississippi across from the mouth of the Missouri. While Lewis was off recruiting more men and buying supplies, I set myself to forging a mixed group of raw recruits and volunteer soldiers into a disciplined military unit.
Shields bumps into Coulter. The group falls into disarray.
Company, halt! Damn it, Coulter, do you know left from right?
Didn't know I signed up for dancing lessons.
Private,
Sir.
Private, fetch a shovel and set yourself to dig in latrines.
My God, Ordway, I'm not taking any more orders from the likes of you. I'll damn well shoot you first!
Coulter seizes his powder horn and starts loading his rifle. Veteran soldier Patrick Gass steps forward, takes the barrel of Coulter's rifle in his hand.
Here now. You don't want to be doing that.
Coulter looks at Gass, hesitates, relinquishes his rifle. Interior officers' quarters, morning. Clark is asleep in his bunk. The silence is shattered by a volley of gunfire. He seizes his rifle and cautiously opens the door. The men standing in formation, grinning at the sight of their commanding officer in his nightshirt.
Merry Christmas, Captain!
Merry Christmas, men. Sergeant Ordway, I expect an extra ration of whiskey is in order. I've invited the local settlers to a shooting competition. I know who's going to get beat.
Exterior, firing grounds, day. Wreathed in smoke, George Drouillard, 30, who has the straight black hair of his Shawnee mother, swiftly reloads, fires, reloads. Settlers exchange startled looks.
George Drouillard was our civilian interpreter, best rifleman and woodsman I've ever seen. Lewis referred to him as that excellent man. He was killed by the Blackfeet in 1810. I expect he took more than one of them with him. They paid him the compliment of hacking him to pieces.
Exterior, shore of the Mississippi, day. Clark stands reading a letter. Lewis's dog foraging nearby.
A week before our departure, I learned my captain's commission had been denied. Secretary of War Dearborn had instead seen fit to grant me the rank of lieutenant.
Honking of migrating geese, Clark looks up at them.
But the final insult, my commission was dated the day it was signed. I had served 6 months with neither pay nor recognition.
Exterior, keelboat, day. Ordway chants the beat for the oarsmen as the keelboat sets out, followed by the 2 pirogues. Children run along the shore, women smiling, men cheering, firing rifles into the air. Clark nods to Shields, who holds the port fire to the fuse of the cannon. It booms in salute.
On the 14th of May, we set out and proceeded on under a gentle breeze up the Missouri. Captain Lewis was delayed making travel arrangements for a group of Osage Indians to visit Mr. Jefferson in Washington. Lewis joined us by land at St. Charles. The second day on the river, he fell off a bluff and went to kill himself.
Interior, cabin of keelboat, day. Clark dabs salve on abrasions on Lewis's back. Murmur of men's voices on shore.
I was trying to get a better look at some Indian drawings. About your commission, I think it best not to inform the men about your rank.
I did not think myself very well treated.
Clark applies salve with sudden, angry vigor. Lewis flinches. Turning, he bumps the tin of salve, knocking it out of Clark's hand. He lays a hand on Clark's arm. Mindful of the men, he speaks in a low voice.
By God, I'll not let the petty bureaucracies of Washington drive a wedge between us. We share an equal command, Captain Clark. So shall I address you, and so shall refer to you in my dispatches, even if they be to Secretary of War Dearborn himself. And I intend to see to it your compensation is equal to mine.
Lewis offers the tin to Clark. They look at each other. Clark takes the tin, puts a hand on Lewis's shoulder, turns him, dabs salve on his back. Exterior, keelboat, day. Willard lifts a hand from his oar, wipes sweat from his eyes with the back of his hand. Notes Joseph Whitehouse, 29, slumped over his oar, lays a hand on his back.
Whitehouse.
Ordway calls out from the upper deck.
We got a man down.
Lewis emerges from the cabin, looks at Whitehouse.
Get this man out of the sun.
Shields and Bratton carry Whitehouse to the cabin. Lewis nods at Hugh McNeil, 25, who takes Whitehouse's place.
As we were making our way up the Missouri that summer, Mr. Jefferson met with the delegation of Osage Lewis had sent to Washington.
Interior, the President's house, day. Jefferson bows his head slightly to 4 Osage in ceremonial dress. Hesitantly, they respond in kind.
I sent the beloved man, Captain Lewis, one of my own household, to learn something of the people with whom we are now united.
An interpreter speaks with the Osage, gives them their response.
We have seen the beloved man. We shook his hand. We heard the words you put in his mouth. We wish him well where he is. We have him in our hearts.
Exterior, campsite, night. Men sit around campfires. Gass's group, the Kentucky Nine, Willard and Ordway talking quietly. Pryor looks at Clark.
Sir, how far do you reckon it is from the Mandan villages to the Pacific?
Men fall silent, listening.
It's 1,600 miles to the Mandan villages, maybe 2,000 more to the Pacific.
What if there's no game to be had out there?
Lewis sets his plate aside.
The president's political enemies accuse him of bankrupting the national treasury to buy a vast desert. We hope to prove them wrong. Gentlemen, I bid you a good evening.
Clark rises and follows Lewis to the keelboat. Silence. Men exchange glances.
Sounds like running off a bluff in the dark, hoping there's something to break your fall.
Exterior, campsite, night, continuous. Men grin as Gass places a garter snake in an empty bedroll and hurriedly sits by the fire. Shannon emerges from the trees, removes his trousers and moccasins, settles himself into the bedroll, pause, gropes about.
God!
Men roar with laughter as Shannon scrambles to his feet and flings the snake into the darkness. Shannon looks at Gass.
Reckon I don't have to ask who it was that put a snake in my bed.
Exterior, campsite, day. Men break camp as Lewis talks with Juilliard. Juilliard mounts up and rides away. Lewis turns to the men.
Gentlemen, Juilliard came up on sights of a recent Indian encampment. We are now on full alert. Sergeant Ordway, you will see to the guard.
Interior, cabin of keelboat, morning. Lewis sits pulling on a boot. Clark buttoning his vest. Ordway enters. Plainly upset, he addresses Clark.
Sir, while changing the guard, I found a man asleep on duty. Private Gass was with me.
Which man?
It was Private Willard, sir.
You will assemble the men for court-martial proceedings.
Sir, I hope... Yes, sir.
Clark and Lewis look at each other. Exterior, campsite day, continuous. The assembled company stands at attention. Willard forward of the group, Ordway and Gass 2 paces behind.
Private Willard, did you consider we might have been overrun and murdered in our sleep?
Sir, I was lying down, but I was awake the whole time.
The sergeant of the guard has admitted to the court he had difficulty rousing you.
Willard stands silent.
Private Alexander Willard, the court finds you guilty of lying down and sleeping while on guard. Military law directs you to be put to death.
Veteran soldiers stand grim and knowing, disbelief on the faces of new recruits. Ordway seems about to step forward. Lewis stops him with a look, addresses Willard.
This being your first offense, the court is persuaded to leniency. You are sentenced to 100 lashes, divided into equal portions over a period of 4 days.
Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. The company stands at attention as Ordway and Floyd bind Willard's wrist to a split timber nailed crossways to a tree. Ordway leans close, says something to Willard, steps back. Lewis nods to Pryor. With a grimace, Pryor raises the whip. Crack of whip against bare flesh. Willard gasps and sets his jaw. Ordway stands at attention, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Exterior, keelboat, day, continuous. Willard winces as Lewis dabs salve on his lacerated back.
You'll have scars.
I know that, sir. I've seen stripes on men's backs. Never figured I'd be one of them.
You and Sergeant Ordway are friends. Do you understand he had no choice but to report you?
He says it grieved him something awful.
You're a good man, Willard. I regret it was necessary to make an example of you. You'll be expected to manure as usual.
In the end, Alexander Willard would name one of his sons for Lewis.
Exterior, campsite, night. Willard takes his plate from Weiser. Ordway sits eating, looks up with a tentative smile. Willard walks past him and joins Gass's group. Ordway sits alone, eating, eyes downcast. Exterior, campsite, day. The company stands at attention as Ordway raises the ship's flag. Shields holds the port fire to the cannon. It belches fire and smoke, the report echoing on the river.
Men, you're to be congratulated. We're averaging 15 miles per day, a velocity nearly unheard of on the Missouri. Sergeant Ordway will now issue an extra ration of whiskey in celebration of Independence Day.
Men grin. Gass drapes an arm over Shannon's shoulder.
This one's barely weaned, sir. You think you ought to be tasting hard liquor so early in the day? Hey, Joe Field, you don't look so good.
Joe Field limps toward them, worried, using his rifle as a crutch. He eases himself down on a stump.
Snake got me. I didn't see him till I thought I was right on him.
Men gather around, watching anxiously as Lewis examines Joe's discolored foot.
God, will my brother be all right, sir?
The eminent Dr. Benjamin Rush prepared me for all such emergencies. We'll bleed him and apply a poultice.
Exterior, keelboat, day. The keelboat is under sail, oarsmen lounging about. Joe Field sitting aft, leg extended, a poultice on his foot. At the tiller, Ordway steers toward deeper water near shore. Cruzetts chops a hand frantically to larboard.
No, no, tree!
The mast strikes an overhanging tree and splinters, men scrambling out of the way as it comes down in a tangle of sail and rigging. Clark emerges from the cabin.
Put him to shore. We'll need to replace our mast.
Exterior, wooded area, day, continuous. Shields, Bratton, and Reed hold a timber steady as Gass strips bark from it with an adze. Bratton spies the dog sniffing at a rotting stump.
Heard Captain Lewis paid $20 for the dog.
God almighty, that's 4 months' wages. Not for him it ain't. Captain's pays $20 a month.
He's right. Purdy, ain't he?
You talking about the dog or Captain Lewis?
They laugh. Gass pauses, leans on his adze.
Gentlemen, he calls us. Who's he talking to? Heard his great-granddaddy was the richest man in Virginia. Strikes me he's more suited for dancing a minuet than leading an expedition. I'm counting on Captain Clark to see us through. All in all well, long as nothing happens to Captain Clark. I got goddamn trots.
Reed hurries off into the trees. Gass shakes his head, goes back to work with his adze. Interior, cabin of keelboat, day. Clark and Lewis sit, writing.
We've seen 7 more men with dysentery. I'm at a loss as to the cause of it.
They look at each other. Shannon enters with a live, scolding magpie. Lewis puts down his quill and examines it with interest.
They're uncommonly bold, sir. They'll steal meat right out of your hands when we're butchering.
You have a good eye, Shannon. It's a new species of magpie. Tell Glassies to build a cage for it.
Pleased with himself, Shannon exits. Clark dips his quill in the ink pot and continues writing. Frowning, he noisily scratches out a word. Lewis looks at him, smiles.
We were required to keep daily journals. It was a task I rightly felt myself unsuited for. I'd heard it said I spelled mosquito 26 different ways.
Exterior, campsite, evening. Men sit talking. Floyd, Shannon, and York are in the river, laughing, splashing each other. A sudden cry of alarm.
Captain Lewis!
Floyd stands bent, holding his side, Shannon and York looking on in alarm. Lewis is on his feet in an instant, running, followed by Clark and Pryor. Lewis and Pryor take Floyd's arms, help him out of the water. Interior, cabin of keelboat, evening, continuous. Pryor looks on, worried, as Lewis makes an incision in Floyd's arm. Clark holds a basin, blood flowing into it. Lewis tightens the screw on the tourniquet, looks at Clark.
We'll give him 3 of Dr. Rush's pills.
Exterior, campsite, night. Bratton patrols the perimeter of the camp, notes Lewis sitting on his haunches beside Floyd, checking his pulse. Lewis rises, slips quietly away through sleeping men. Exterior, bluff above the Missouri, day. The dog at his side, Lewis emerges from a draw, carrying a cluster of grapes. He spies Floyd on bent knee, examining something in his cupped hand, stirring at it with a finger.
What have you found, Sergeant?
It's dirt, sir. Just dirt.
Floyd opens his hand, lets the wind take it. Lewis holds out the grapes.
My God. Everywhere I look, I see new species not found in the United States. Taste.
Floyd takes a grape, samples it, nods in approval.
I must save some seeds for Mr. Jefferson.
Floyd spits out a seed, gazes out over the river.
I reckon this is a fair land. Has ever any man laid eyes on it, sir?
If there is a heaven, Sergeant, I pray it has a river in it. Did Dr. Rush's pills operate well?
The man calls them pills thunderclappers. They sure clean a man right out proper.
Lewis laughs. They stand eating grapes and talking. 2 men of different backgrounds discovering they like each other. Floyd makes a remark, grins. Lewis laughs, lays a hand on his shoulder.
Floyd wrote in his journal, "I've recovered my health again. But that late summer of 1804, we were about to meet with events that would try us as nothing had yet done."
Exterior, wooded area, evening. Reed and McNeil relieve themselves. Reed starts buttoning his trousers, winces, inspects a blister on his hand.
This adventure ain't turned out to be what I thought it was. I sure didn't sign up to haul no damn boat 1,600 miles.
That grand old land's the best chance I got to make myself a good life for myself.
What good's a grand of land if you're too used up to work it?
Exterior, campsite, day. Clark and Ordway look on as Lewis speaks to Joulard, who stands holding the reins of his horse.
Private Reed has deserted. Find him and bring him back.
He tried to shoot me, by God. I shoot back.
Bring him back, dead or alive. I assume full responsibility. My written orders will clearly state my instructions to you.
Joulard nods, mounts his horse, and rides away. Exterior, campsite, day. Joulard rides into camp, herding Reed ahead of him, prodding him with the barrel of his rifle. Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. The company stands at attention. Reed stands forward between Pryor and Floyd, his hands bound in front of him.
Moses Reed, the court finds you guilty of desertion and stealing a public rifle. You are sentenced to 40 lashes. I must assign you to the French pantry charged with guiding us to the Mandan villages. I've recommended you to be put to hard labor.
What about my pay?
Lewis nods to Pryor and Floyd, who take Reed by the arms.
I said, what about my pay? By God, I ain't working for him. Frenchies will no pay.
You gave up your right to pay when you deserted. Proceed with the flogging.
Reed lunges free. Hacking up a gob of phlegm, he spits on Lewis.
You ain't nothing but the president's lapdog playing at being an officer. Ain't just me thinking it neither.
Get him out of here!
Pryor and Floyd reach for him. Reed strikes Floyd with his bound fists, bloodying his nose. He shoulders Pryor, knocking him down, turns to the men.
Don't you see? He's going to get the whole lot of you killed out there. Your bones bleaching in the sun and nobody ever knowing what became of you.
Reed backs away from Pryor.
I'm relieved to be shed of it. He ain't fit to lead no one.
Floyd launches himself at Reed, silencing him with a sharp blow to the midriff. Reed goes to his knees, gasping. Floyd feels his nose to see if it's broken. Lewis steps forward, takes his kerchief from his pocket and wipes away the blood. examines Floyd's nose, pats him on the arm, turns to the men.
Gentlemen, deserters will be dealt with promptly. If we can't rely upon one another, then by God, we will die out here. Company dismissed.
Lewis turns on his heel and walks away. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Men stand at attention, Pryor holding a flag on a staff as Juilliard accompanies Little Thief and a small party of mounted autos into camp, one pulling a travois behind his horse. As they dismount, it becomes apparent one of the autos is naked. Juilliard joins Clark and Lewis.
Why is that man naked?
He tell me, I am very poor, I have no clothes. He wants gifts.
The gentleman's skill at bargaining is most persuasive. Sergeant Ordway, fetch him one of those calico shirts and a pair of trousers.
Lewis steps forward and places a medal on a blue ribbon around Little Thief's neck.
We are sent by the great chief of the 17 great nations of America, who extends his hand to you in friendship.
Juilliard signs. Little Thief takes the medal in his hand, studies the engraved likeness of Thomas Jefferson, lets the medal drop, nods to two autos. They hurry to the travois, unbinding strips of rawhide, holding a buffalo robe in place. Watermelons roll free. Little Thief signs.
He asks, do we have whiskey and tobacco?
Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day, later. Scattered remains of a watermelon feast. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard sit with the autos as Cruzat takes up his fiddle and starts playing. Floyd gives Pryor a courtly bow. Pryor laughs, curtsies. They dance. Men come forward and join them, stealing amused looks at Floyd, who dances with joyous abandon. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, night, continuous. Bonfires. Floyd, Shields, and McNeil stand guard. Floyd sets the butt of his rifle on the ground and leans forward, holding his side. Shield grins.
Too much dancing, Sergeant.
Gasping with pain, Floyd goes to his knees.
Sergeant? Sergeant Floyd? God almighty. McNeil, go fetch Ordway.
Exterior, campsite, day. Men steal anxious looks at the group around Floyd. Clark and Lewis on bent knee, Lewis monitoring Floyd's pulse. Pryor looking on with a worried expression. York with a basin of water, sponging Floyd's brow with a wet cloth.
I want you to write me a letter.
I'll fetch pen and paper.
Lewis lays a hand on Clark's arm, detaining him. Puts his ear against Floyd's chest, sets a hand on Floyd's forehead, closes Floyd's eyes with his thumb.
What? No.
A sudden keening, York rocking back and forth, tears flowing down his cheeks. Cruzat crosses himself. Shannon goes to his knees.
God.
Exterior, bluff above the Missouri, day. A 15-star flag draped on a coffin made of raw wood, tapered at head and foot. Pryor holds a flag on a staff, the remaining Kentucky 7 standing honor guard. Corporal Richard Worthington, 29, and his crewmen from the white pirogue stand somewhat removed from the main party. At a distance, Frenchmen from the brown pirogue stand with bared heads bowed. Lewis reads from a small black book.
Our hearts fill with sorrow, as in the narrow house we have builded thee. We commit thee to the earth.
Lewis falters, looks out across river and prairie.
In as far a land as ever any man laid eyes on, where flows two rivers, one of which shall now forever be known as Floyd's River. Rest thee here, and may Almighty God smile upon thee on the morn of thy waking.
Present arms. Port arms. Prepare to fire.
Chorus of rifles being cocked.
Fire.
Smoke and fire erupts from 7 rifles. Rush of wings as a flock of birds rises from a tree. Shannon raises his voice in a hymn, his clear tenor soaring over river and prairie. Exterior, bluff above the Missouri, day, continuous. Men file silently down the bluff. Still holding the flag on its staff, Pryor stands beside Floyd's grave. Letters burned into a cedar post state, Sergeant C. Floyd died here 20th of August, 1804. Lewis retraces his steps, joins Pryor. Pryor utters a small sound, half laugh, half sob.
He come around after I lost my wife. I never give him much thought. Just one of my cousins, a lot younger than me. I told him to go away, leave me be. Then I look out the window and see him planting my corn.
Lewis lays a hand on his arm. Pryor flings it off.
No, you don't understand. It was me talked him into coming. God, I told his ma I'd look out for him.
Lewis takes the flag. Sobbing, Pryor allows himself to be led away. He stumbles. Lewis holds fast to his arm. Exterior, campsite, evening, later. The party eats in silence, waving away mosquitoes, looking up as Pryor rises and walks away into the trees. Gas slaps at a mosquito. Lewis sets his plate aside.
Sergeant Orway, issue some bear grease to the men. Inform them that to rub it on the exposed parts of their bodies is protection from the mosquitoes.
Lewis rises, walks upstream, studies the gold and gray strata of a bluff, scoops up a handful of sediment, sniffs at it, tastes it. He looks at green scum on the water, sits on his heels and dips his finger into it, tastes. Interior, cabin of keelboat, morning. Clark wakes to the sound of vomiting, rises and goes on deck. Lewis lies curled up on the bow.
My God, what have you done? You'd like to have poisoned yourself.
Interior, cabin of keelboat, day. His hands shaking, Lewis struggles to tie his red captain's sash. Clark steps forward, ties it, gives it a final pat. Lewis gives him a look of gratitude.
In the latest military fashion, Lewis tied his sash outside his uniform coat. But an officer's sash wasn't merely decorative. Should he fall in battle, it was designed to carry him from the field. It might also be used as a burial shroud. Thus an officer carried on his person a constant reminder of his mortality.
Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. Gas stands forward of the assembled company.
Gentlemen, you have chosen by popular vote the man who will now assume the duties of sergeant. Patrick Gas, may you serve as honorably as did Sergeant Floyd. And now, another matter of great importance.
Clark takes Lewis's arm, steadying him.
Captain Lewis suspects poisonous minerals might be leaching into the river from the bluffs. He's observed the surface scum tastes of them. When taking water from the river, you will agitate it to disperse the scum, then take water from below the surface.
Begging your pardon, sir, but are you saying Captain Lewis has tasted the minerals and the scum, knowing they was likely to make him sick?
Understand this, Sergeant. When my men are sick, by God, I want to know why.
Company dismissed. Break camp and get ready to proceed on.
Clark holds Lewis's arm as they walk away toward the keelboat. Men exchange glances, turn to their duties. Interior, cabin of keelboat, morning. Clark sits writing in his journal. Quill poised, he casts an anxious look at Lewis, hollow-eyed and shaky, buttoning his vest. They look up as Ordway enters.
I sent Private Shannon to find the horses. He failed to come up last night.
Fire the cannon. Sound the horns. If he doesn't come in, send 2 men to look for him.
Exterior, prairie, day, continuous. Vast prairie, empty but for a coyote trotting with its nose to the ground. Blare of sounding horns, boom of the cannon. The coyote looks up, wheels and runs.
Find the horses. A simple task. A couple of hours at the most. Shannon had taken no provisions and little ammunition. As the days passed, there was no sign of either him or our 2 horses. Near the end of August, we met up with the Yankton Sioux.
Exterior, bluff above the Missouri, day. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard sit with Chief Shake's hand, watching Yankton Sioux dance to the music of drums and rattles.
Ask if they've ever seen a young white man, afoot, or with 2 horses.
Juilliard signs. The chief shakes his head. Signs.
He says many moons pass, they see other white men, men like us, seeking the great waters we call the Pacific. But the Teton Sioux stop all the way to try to go up the river. He says maybe they killed our young man and took his horses.
Clark and Lewis exchange glances. A small boy approaches Lewis and stands eyeing the feather on his cocked hat. Lewis smiles. The boy's mother comes shyly forward, takes the boy by the hand, and leads him away.
As we proceeded on, Juilliard came up on a colony of small barking animals. Little dogs, the Frenchman called them. He was so taken with them, he wanted a live specimen.
Exterior, prairie dog town, day. Clark, Juilliard, and Gas look on as York shovels dirt from an excavation. Hands clasped behind his back, Lewis paces. He stops.
Sergeant, direct the men to gather the cooking kettles and fetch water from the river.
Sir?
We'll flush one out.
Exterior, prairie dog town, day, continuous. Men lug kettles, pouring water into York's excavation. It's plain they lack Lewis's enthusiasm for the project. Grinning, York holds up a half-drowned prairie dog by the scruff of its neck. Delighted, Lewis examines it.
Lewis's live prairie dog would travel by river to New Orleans, then by sailing ship to the city of Washington, where it was met with great astonishment.
Interior, cabin of keelboat, morning. Clark wakes to the sound of a locker lid on deck. Notes Lewis's empty bunk. Rising, he watches as Ordway stows a knapsack and bedroll in the aft locker.
It's 2 weeks since Private Shannon went missing, sir. The men, they're moping about. I thought it best to stow his things with Floyd's, where they're less of a reminder.
Exterior, campsite, morning, continuous. Shields, standing guard, looks startled to see Lewis approaching, long stride, rifle in hand, a deer slung over his shoulders, his dog at his side.
Do you think my rifle mere decoration, Shield?
No, sir, just didn't expect to see you out hunting.
After my father died, my mother took down the rifle and set it in my hands. I was hunting alone at the age of 7.
Musingly, Shields watches Lewis enter camp. Exterior, bluff above the Missouri, day. Their faces ominous with black paint, 2 Teton Sioux warriors crouch behind a rock, studying Shannon, who sits by a log up by the river, holding the reins of a horse. Startled, the warriors see the keelboat coming into sight around a bend, proceeding upstream under full sail. Exterior, keelboat, day, continuous. Lewis stands on the upper deck, scanning the shore with a spyglass. He goes still. Grinning, he lowers the glass.
Put into larboard shore to pick up Private Shannon.
Men exchange glances. Grinning, they raise a chorus of cheers. Gas and Shields link arms and dance a jig. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day, continuous. Hollow-eyed, his clothes hanging loosely on him, Shannon rises as Lewis and Juilliard approach. Relinquishing the horse's reins to Juilliard, he looks anxiously at Lewis.
Sir, I'm sorry to report I lost one of the horses. Something spooked him one night, and I...
Knees buckling, he collapses. Juilliard calmly loops the reins through some driftwood, scoops up Shannon, and carries him to the keelboat. Exterior, keelboat, day, continuous. Shannon sits on a locker. Men gather around, grinning as he seizes meat from a plate and gnaws off a piece.
I ran out of ammunition the second day, so I carved a stick into a bullet and shot a rabbit. I've been living on grapes and plums ever since. God, all this time I thought you were ahead of me. I was trying to catch up.
Hoist the sail.
Exterior, keelboat, day. As the keelboat rounds a bend in the river, startled men taking Teton Sioux warriors lining both shores, armed with bows and muskets. Cruzette crosses himself.
La Teton Sioux, de nous savants.
Sergeant Ordway, instruct the men to prepare all things for either peace or war.
Exterior, Teton Sioux village, day. Followed by armed warriors, Teton women and children looking at them curiously. Clark, Cruzette, and Juilliard walk through the village with Black Buffalo and a swaggering young chief known as the Partisan.
I went ashore with gifts for the Teton Sioux. I was greeted by 2 chiefs. The younger of the 2 seemed eager to prove himself. I expected he was about to give me some trouble.
The Partisan points out a wooden pen holding Omaha women and young girls. He signs in a boastful manner.
He says great victory over the Omahas. Many prisoners taken, many scalps.
They walk on to the river, where the keelboat is anchored offshore. The crew of the White Pirogue waits to take Clark and his party back to the keelboat. As Clark's party approaches the pirogue, warriors suddenly surge forward and surround them. The Partisan smiles, signs. Juilliard looks at Clark.
He says you stay. We go back to the big boat, fill the pirogue with goods and bring them to him.
Tell him we're on a long journey and a few goods to spare.
Juilliard signs. The Partisan responds.
He says we're squaws, and at a word from him, his warriors will kill as easy as they kill dogs for a feast.
Prepare for action.
Juilliard and Cruzette cock their rifles. Warriors cock their muskets, snatch arrows from their quivers. On the keelboat, Lewis steps onto the bow.
Stand ready for action.
Clatter of locker lids thrown up to form a barricade, a chorus of rifles being cocked, clanking of musket balls as Shields arms the cannon, creaking as Shields swivels the cannon, aiming it at shore. Lewis takes the port fire and holds it near the fuse. On shore, warriors look warily at the keelboat. Clark sheathes his sword and turns to the waiting pirogue. Warriors parting to make way for him. Juilliard and Cruzette back away, rifles at ready. Black Buffalo steps forward, signs.
He asks to see the big boat.
Clark gives Black Buffalo a hand up. Rifle at ready, Cruzette unties the mooring line with one hand. Juilliard gives him a hand into the pirogue. Exterior, cabin of keelboat, day, continuous. As Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard watch, Black Buffalo ponders a map on the wall, signs.
He invites us to a feast. He wishes to make amends. He says the other chief is a bad man who speaks out of both sides of his face.
Black Buffalo studies a pair of scissors. Lewis takes them up and snips a thin strand of his own hair, shows Black Buffalo how to fit thumb and index finger into the grips.
The Teton Sioux are the most powerful nation on the river. Mr. Jefferson is most anxious we make a good impression on him. I fear refusing the chief's invitation would be taken as an insult.
Black Buffalo seizes a generous swatch of Lewis's hair and snips it off, looks at the scissors, utters a grunt of approval at this clever invention. Exterior, Teton Sioux village, night. Drum beats, chanting. Teton women dance around a bonfire, wielding poles adorned with swaths of long black hair. Clark, Lewis, Juilliard, and Cruzette sit eating with Black Buffalo.
Omaha scalps on their poles. My mother, she was Omaha.
If you can get near the Omaha prisoners, ask if they know the Teton's intentions towards us.
Gnawing on a bone, Cruzette rises, Teton's making way for him. The village is lit by bonfires. An old woman sitting by a teepee looks up, her eyes filmy and unseeing. 2 guards armed with muskets eye Cruzette as he stops near the Omaha prisoners. He unbuttons his trousers and starts urinating. The guards laugh, turn away, talk. Cruzette speaks softly. An Omaha woman replies. Exterior, Teton Sioux village, night, continuous. Clark gnaws meat from a bone, looks at it thoughtfully.
What manner of meat is this?
Juilliard and Black Buffalo sign.
He says it's dog.
God.
Clark puts it down. Black Buffalo looks inquiringly at him, selects a meaty bone from a basket, offers it to him in an insistent manner.
He says, take, eat, there's plenty more.
Beat of drums, chanting, silhouettes of dancers against the firelight. Clark notes the partisan on the far side of the fire conferring with armed warriors. Clark's vision is temporarily blocked by a dancer. The partisan and his warriors are no longer there.
God, what's keeping Cruzette?
Exterior, Teton Sioux village, night, continuous. Cruzette buttons his trousers. The Omaha woman cries out in warning. Cruzette turns and finds himself looking into the barrel of a musket. The guard makes a sound like a gunshot, laughs, jabs him in the face with the barrel of the musket. Reeling, Cruzette backs away as the guards advance, laughing, fainting at him with their muskets. Exterior, white pirogue, night, continuous. Creaks of oars as the pirogue approaches the keelboat. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard sit aft. Clark looks back at bonfires on shore.
I fear Cruzette has met with foul play.
Tiller hard to labor.
The pirogue scrapes against the keelboat's anchor cable, slicing it. The keelboat starts drifting away.
God, sir, I didn't see the anchor cable in the dark.
All hands to stations. We cut the anchor cable. We're set adrift.
What shall we do, sir?
Put in to shore. You risk lodging on a sandbar in the dark.
Exterior, keelboat, moored ashore, night, continuous. Clark and Lewis stand looking to shore. Bonfires, armed warriors milling about. Clark turns to the men, speaks quietly.
Raise the barricades.
Men raise the locker lids. Exterior, keelboat, moored ashore, morning, continuous. Men stand with rifles in hand, warily watching the partisan and his warriors on shore. Pryor spies a log, bleached white by the elements, moving toward the keelboat. A buckskin-clad arm flung over it. Cocking his rifle, he takes aim on the arm. A head appears. A black eye patch.
God, it's Cruzette.
Gass and Pryor haul Cruzette aboard. His brow swollen and discolored, his skin broken. He speaks urgently to Clark.
Omaha women hear guards talking. Say Teton does not let us go on.
Willard, untie the mooring cable.
Men raise their rifles, covering Willard as he slips overboard and wades ashore. As he unties the cable, warriors surge forward and seize it. He wades back to the keelboat. Joe Field gives him a hand up. Lewis inspects Cruzette's head wound.
What happened?
Teton guard hit me with a musket.
Lewis steps angrily onto the bow, looks at the partisan.
Tell your men to remove their hands from our cable.
He says give them tobacco. They take their hands from it.
Lewis draws his sword, holds it ready to cut the cable.
Tell him I will not be trifled with.
Clark spies 2 warriors standing on a knoll, their muskets trained on Lewis. He snatches 2 rolls of tobacco from an open locker, speaks softly to the men.
Stand ready for action.
Clark joins Lewis on the bow, addresses the partisan.
You say if we give tobacco to your men, they'll take their hands from our cable. If you are a true chief, your men will do as you say.
Clark waits for Juilliard to translate, throws the tobacco to the warriors, takes the port fire from Shields and holds it near the fuse of the cannon.
Are you a true chief?
Juilliard signs. Silence. Men sight along the barrels of their rifles, fingers poised on triggers, warriors with weapons at ready. His gaze fixed on Clark, the partisan makes a chopping motion with his hand. The warriors release the cable. Lewis returns his sword to its scabbard and swiftly hauls in the cable.
Hoist the sail! The Teutons had made off with our last horse. As we proceeded on, Drouillard, now afoot, reported coming up on abandoned villages.
Exterior, abandoned village, day. Drouillard looks on as Lewis and Crozet peer into a collapsing earth lodge. A ray of sun shines through a hole in the roof, spotlighting a skull turned toward them, a skeletal hand extending from under a rotting buffalo robe as though in silent appeal. In the shadows, more skeletal remains. Crozet crosses himself.
Smallpox. This village of the dead.
Exterior, Arikar village, day. Accompanied by 3 Arikar chiefs, Spanish trader Joseph Gravelines shakes hands with Lewis and Clark. The chiefs look wonderingly at Lewis's large Newfoundland dog.
I am called Joseph Gravelines. I lived many years with the Arikara.
Lewis takes a spyglass from his knapsack and demonstrates it to the elder of the 3 chiefs. The chief looks through it, sees York walking through the village, followed at a distance by children. York stops and looks back at the children with a fierce expression. They run screaming with mock terror. The chief lowers the spyglass, looks at it wonderingly.
The Arikara never see black man before. Think he is a white man painted black. See him wash in river, black not come off.
The chiefs watch curiously as Lewis gathers a clump of dried grass. Taking up a burning glass, he focuses sunlight on it. The elder chief confers with Gravelines.
Eagle Feather asks, do you go to trade with the Mandans?
Tell him no. We go where the land leads and the sun sets on the face of the great water.
He say he has heard of the great water called the Stinking Lake. He asks why you want to go there.
Tell him we will see that which is not known to us.
The chiefs confer among themselves, nodding sagely.
They say, now they understand. You are on a vision quest.
Vision quest?
Is when a man leave his village, go into the wilderness, stay until there comes to him the meaning of his existence.
Tell them I think it is so.
The dried grass blackens, bursts into flame. Lewis smiles at the Arikara's astonishment, gives the burning glass to Eagle Feather. The chiefs examine it wonderingly.
Tell them the wigwams of our people are many, our village is numerous as the stars of the heavens. Our great chief extends to them an invitation to visit him in his village.
Gravelines translates. The chiefs consider it in silence. At last, Eagle Feather gives his reply.
Eagle Feather wishes to see for himself all that you speak of.
With Joseph Gravelines acting as his interpreter, Eagle Feather would travel to the city of Washington, and so began a chain of events that would end in tragedy. We proceeded on and set about building our winter quarters just below the Mandan villages.
Exterior, site of winter quarters, day. Clark and Lewis watch gas stepping off distances, driving stakes, men cutting and notching logs. York carrying a log balanced on one hand, showing off for watching Mandans. Crozet approaches with Frenchmen, Toussaint, Charbonneau, 46, Sakagawa, 15, and Large with child, follows at a respectful distance, eyes downcast.
This one is Toussaint Charbonneau. He say we need horses to cross the mountains, get horses from Shoshons. He say we are very fortunate. He is free to go with us and be our interpreter.
He speaks Shoshone.
One of his wives is Shoshone. Hidatz has captured her in raid. She is called Sacagawea.
Lewis looks thoughtfully at Sacagawea.
Combien elle paye mes services excellents? He asks how much you pay for his excellent services.
Tell him interpreter's pay is $25 a month.
$25 par mois.
Charbonneau nods, offers his hand. They shake hands. Exterior, officers' quarters, day. Clark and an aging Frenchman named René Gessame watches as Lewis presents a military coat and cocked hat to the Mandan chief. Sheheke? Pleased, Sheheke examines his new treasures, sets the cocked hat on his head, speaks.
Mandan chiefs say to you, winter long, cold, much snow. If they eat, you eat. If they starve, you must starve also.
Exterior, parade grounds, day. Crozet plays his fiddle, Gas a Jew's harp, Shannon a sounding horn. Mandans watch the men dance, laughing as a French crewman dances on his hands. Clark and Lewis stand with Chief Sheheke, wearing his new military coat and cocked hat.
Ordway complained he found 14 Mandans eating in his quarters.
Lewis laughs. Charbonneau and Gessame roll dice at a nearby campfire. Jessamine grins as Charbonnet relinquishes a beaver pelt. They spring to their feet and retreat as a Mandan drags a screaming woman toward the fire. He grabs her by the hair, forcing her face toward the flames. The music dies away as Lewis strides forward. Sacrificing a clump of hair, the woman clambers away. The man goes after her. Lewis steps in his way.
Jessamine, ask why this woman is being so ill-treated.
Jessamine comes forward cautiously, confers with the man.
Is his wife. He say he not want her any more. One of your men lie with her. He can have her.
If the man who lay with her offers him gifts, will he take her back and live with her in peace?
The Mandan considers it before replying.
Yes, to see gifts.
Interior officers' quarters, day. 2 young Mandan men watch Lewis write. He looks up. They smile agreeably and move away. One opens a book and watches the pages fall back into place. The other picks up a compass. The needle moves. Startled, he puts it down. Lewis looks up as Clark enters, takes in his alarmed expression, puts down his quill, and rises.
It's Pryor. They were on the keelboat taking down the mast. I think he's dislocated his shoulder.
Interior, Pryor's quarters, day, continuous. Pryor sits on his bunk, Clark and Gass looking on as Lewis grips Pryor's wrist and elbow.
God, Captain, you already tried 3 times. I don't think I can.
An extra gill of whiskey, Sergeant. No duty for a week. I expect the entire company will be trying to figure out how to dislocate his shoulder.
Pryor manages a wan smile. Lewis applies pressure. Pryor cries out and goes limp as his shoulder snaps back into place. Lewis catches him and lays him back on his bunk, covers him with a buffalo robe. Exterior, sentry's platform, day. Willard, hooded and muffled, dances about to keep warm, watches Juilliard gather firewood from the stockpile.
It was colder than we ever knew it to be back in the States. So cold, trees split with a sound like gunshots. The moon of the popping trees, the Mandans called it.
Sound like a gunshot. Willard looks out over the frozen expanse, sees a Mandan boy, 13, hobbling toward the gates.
Indian at the gates.
Juilliard puts down his armload of firewood, opens the gates. The boy smiles agreeably. He's lost a moccasin, the toes of his exposed foot pale. Interior storeroom, day. The boy lies strapped to a table. Clark and Gass strip the boy's leg as Lewis takes up a saw.
Your eminent Dr. Rush, he tell you how to do this?
No, but gangrene has set in. If it isn't done, the boy will die.
Lewis sets the saw against the boy's blackened toes. The boy screams. Exterior parade ground, day. The Mandan boy maneuvers smartly on crutches, showing off for 2 other youths. Children play with Lewis's dog. Mandans watch Shields sharpen an axe. Charbonneau and Jessamine are throwing dice. Visibly upset, Lewis emerges from Charbonneau's teepee at the side of the parade grounds. He joins Shields, stands watching him.
But for you making tools to trade for Mandan corn, squash, and beans, I fear we die of starvation.
Maybe so, sir, but I'm sure getting right tired corn, squash, and beans.
Jessamine grins as Charbonneau relinquishes a beaver pelt. Charbonneau rises and stalks out of the fort. Picking his teeth with a fishbone, Jessamine joins Lewis and Shields. Shields gives the axe to a Mandan who examines it with pleasure. A shrill cry issues from the teepee, plainly unnerving Lewis.
This young Shoshone woman, Sacagawea, I fear it's not going well. Dr. Rush provided no instructions for a laying in. It wasn't anticipated any of our party would be giving birth. Don't you have a daughter, Shields?
Yes, sir. Her name's Jeanette.
I don't suppose... Do you know anything about birthing?
No, sir. Granny Gibbs run me out of there. Said men folk just getting away. It is most unfortunate. I have no rattles.
What?
It is old remedy. Take rattle from snake, crumble in water, give to her. It make baby come fast.
I have some rattles among my specimens.
Exterior, sentry's platform, night, later. Ratton leans his rifle against the rail and blows in his hands to warm them. Sound of a newborn baby's cry. He looks wonderingly across the deserted parade grounds where candlelight glows within Charbonneau's teepee. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard watch as the Mandan chief, Sheheke, in his military coat and cocked hat, traces a wandering line in the sand with a stick. He signs.
This is the way of the great river, land of smoke with no fire, lands of Blackfeet and the great bears. Many go that way, never return.
Sheheke makes a mark on the line.
Here the waters fall and the river speaks with a loud voice.
Squatting, Cheheke sculpts sand into multiple ridges.
The shining mountains. Even in the summer they wear snow as a hat.
Clark and Lewis exchange glances.
He says he will watch the river for your return. If you do not come, he will know you are gone onto the spirit world.
Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Smoke drifts across the scene. Corporal Worthington, former commander of the White Pirogue, stands on the deck of the keelboat. His cheek bulges with a chaw of tobacco. Wooden crates are stacked on deck. The prairie dog sleeps in his cage. Oarsmen sit ready, among them deserter Moses Reed. Clark watches Lewis hand a bundle of letters to Worthington.
Letters to our families, assuring them that we are alive and well.
I'll look after him proper, sir. Them Indians make a powerful smoke.
They're burning off the prairies to green up the grass and bring the buffalo.
We are informed the Teton Sioux have vowed to kill every white man they see.
They gotta catch me first.
Clark unties the mooring cable. A French crewman reels it in as Worthington makes his way to the upper deck.
Man them oars, boys. I aim to raise me mug in St. Louis before the end of May.
The keelboat moves away, is obscured by drifting smoke, reappears again farther downriver. Clark and Lewis look to each other, then walk upstream. They stand watching as the men load the 2 pirogues and 6 canoes. The party is talking and laughing, eager to be off. Lewis lays a hand on Clark's shoulder.
We are about to penetrate a country upon which the foot of civilized man has never trod. I can but deem this one of the happiest moments of my life.
Exterior, White Pirogue, day. Oars dip into the water, pirogues and canoes moving upstream. Low voices, an occasional laugh. Shannon sees Sacagawea nursing the infant Pomp. Gas grins and nudges him with an elbow. Embarrassed, Shannon looks away. The party falls silent as they pass a collapsing Indian burial scaffold, a skeleton partially exposed in a rotting buffalo robe. A goshawk calls as though in warning. Exterior, campsite, evening. Cooks wash up in the river. Weiser scours a kettle with sand. Men gathering wood, setting up Charbonneau's teepee. Puzzled, Sacagawea watches Clark write in his journal. Clark looks up, sees Juilliard signing to her.
She watches you write. I tell her it is the silent language of the white man. You tell your chief what you see and do.
Clark smiles at her. She shyly lowers her gaze. Gas sits, mending a moccasin.
I heard when Indians go hunting them bears, they paint themselves up like they're going to war with another nation.
Armed as they are with bows and arrows, the Indians may well fear this animal. I expect we'll find it no match for our rifles.
Juilliard sweeps up his rifle, cocks it, and fires. The earth erupts besides Gas. Gas springs to his feet. Juilliard scoops up a headless rattlesnake with the barrel of his rifle and gives it a toss. Starts reloading his rifle. Men look nervously at the ground around them. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Clark and Lewis walk on shore, the dog foraging ahead. On the river, the White Pirogue proceeds upstream under sail. Lewis pauses to examine a mussel shell. A gust of wind. Clark stops, worried, watching as the White Pirogue turns toward shore.
The wind's changed.
The White Pirogue tips and goes over on its side, the sail slapping on the water.
My God! Most of our gunpowder is on them. Trade goods, our medicine, everything essential to the success of our mission.
Exterior, White Pirogue, day, continuous. Charbonneau releases the tiller.
Grammaire, plan de grâce, la bénida, l'arme de fin.
Jesus, I can't swim.
Objects slide across the tilted deck. A kettle tips over the rail and is gone. Sacagawea intercepts a package wrapped in oiled linen, slips it into Pomp's cradle, and starts retrieving small objects from the water. Medicine bottles, packets of bright beads. At the bow of the boat, feet braced, Cruzette raises his rifle.
Charbonneau, turn the boat or by God I shoot you. Charbonneau, tournez le bateau.
Cruzette loves the rifle on Charbonneau, cocks it. Charbonneau looks at Cruzette in alarm, puts his hand on the tiller, and turns it. Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day, continuous. Lewis drops his rifle. Unbuttoning his coat, he starts toward the river. Alarmed, Clark steps in his way.
My God, what are you thinking? You can't reach them. The water's too cold. You'll drown.
All my life, I've dreamed of reaching the Pacific. By God, I refuse to accept failure.
Lewis goes still, looks past Clark. They watch as the White Pirogue turns, righting herself. Exterior, campsite, day, later. York and Coulter arm wrestle, men gathered around, urging them on. Groans and cheers as York pins Coulter. Gas surrenders a pair of moccasins to a grinning Shields. As Sacagawea lays Pomp on a buffalo robe, the linen-wrapped package falls from his cradle. She looks at it, unwraps it. Clark's journal. She opens it and ponders his writing. Rising, she shyly approaches Clark and offers it to him. Startled, he takes it, watches her walk away.
Cruzette said she sat calmly retrieving items from the water. I credit her with courage and resolution equal to anyone aboard.
The dog rises, looks toward a thicket of willows, growls. Lewis looks at him questioningly. Willard erupts from the thicket, pulling up his trousers, pursued by a huge bear.
Bear! Bear!
Seizing their rifles, men scatter. Sacagawea snatches up Pomp and ducks into the teepee. Willard trips and falls. The dog rushes forward, fainting at the bear. The bear rises up on its hind legs and roars. Ordway darts forward, pulls Willard's arms around his neck, yanks him to his feet.
God damn it, Willard, run!
They run, Willard holding up his trousers, the bear in hot pursuit. Juilliard and Lewis take aim and fire. The bear keeps coming. Startled, Lewis runs toward the river. Juilliard shinnies up a tree and starts reloading. A ragged chorus of sound as men cock their rifles and fire. Smoke hangs in the air. The bear keeps coming. Brandishing his rifle by the barrel, Lewis backs away, falls into a canoe. Juilliard fires from the tree. The bear goes down. Men cautiously come forward. Lewis looks at the bear, measures it by hand widths, straightens.
I believe our curiosity is pretty well satisfied with respect to this animal.
Exterior, white pirogue, day. Men ply the oars, gazing wonderingly at the white cliffs of the Missouri, elegantly sculpted by wind and water.
My God. They look like ruined palaces of ancient kings.
Interior, teepee, night. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard are asleep. Charbonnet and Sacagawea at the rear, Charbonneau snoring. A clatter, pounding of hooves, barking, a shout.
Hiya! Hiya!
Juilliard, Lewis, and Clark seize their rifles and rush from the teepee. An overturned kettle, a scattered campfire, Willard stomping at flames on the grass. Men stand with rifles in hand, looking out in confusion.
What happened?
Don't rightly know, sir.
It was a buffalo. He ran amongst the men, then made straight for your tent, sir. Reckon he'd gone right through it if the dog hadn't persuaded him to change his course.
Shields goes down on one knee, examines hoofprints.
God almighty, damn near run over me.
Exterior, white pirogue, day. Men ply the oars, looking curiously at a smoking bluff. Buffalo come into view through drifting smoke. Deer stand watching them. Exterior, bluff along the Missouri, day. Lewis looks through a spyglass, offers it to Clark, who studies distant, snow-capped mountains.
My God.
I prefer to think of them as a good and easy road until I'm compelled to believe otherwise.
Exterior, campsite, evening. Cottonwood leaves rustle in a breeze. The setting sun casts long shadows. Bratton patrols the perimeter of the camp. The men are cleaning their rifles and sewing moccasins. Clark sits with his field desk in his lap, working on his map. Lewis writes in his journal.
Pair of moccasins last me 2 days if I'm lucky.
White House, stitching a shirt, swats a mosquito, looks at his hand with satisfaction, wipes it on his trousers.
When I said I was good at making leather clothing, I didn't expect to be doing it for 30 men.
Gotta be more careful what you volunteer, White House.
Men laugh. Lewis closes his journal, watches Clark, letter in the name of a river, speaks softly, privately.
I note you've named a river for the young lady who entertained you at tea in the garden.
I wonder, should I express my intentions more strongly? She might accept the hand of another.
My friend, I expect one day your grandchildren will gather round, begging you to tell them about your great adventure.
Cruzette takes up his fiddle and plays, drawing the bow tenderly across the strings. A love song. Shannon sings, men humming along. When the song ends, men sit silent, thoughtful. Sudden cry of a mountain lion, eerily like the screams of a man in great distress. Men seize their weapons and leap to their feet. Bratton cocks his rifle, looks nervously into the darkness.
God almighty. Sound like somebody getting himself killed.
I expect it's feline in nature, some manner of large cat. I doubt it will come near our fires.
All eyes turn to Lewis, still sitting. Gas considers it, puts down his rifle, and adds more wood to the fire. Exterior, on the Missouri, day. Fighting the current, men tow the white pirogue through swift, rock-studded waters between sheer cliffs. White House stands in the pirogue, pushing it clear of rocks with a setting pole. McNeil gasps at a stunted shrub growing among fallen rocks, pulls himself forward, spies a coiled rattlesnake, quickly withdraws his hand.
I'm thinking we took the wrong fork. This don't look like no goddamn Missouri to me.
Lewis up ahead looking for him, falls over the Missouri. You don't find him, then what? Time lost going back? Winter's gonna catch us in them mountains.
Shields peers into the clear water, notes his shredded moccasins, blood coloring the water.
God almighty, them rocks had cut my feet to pieces.
Men sprawl forward as the tow rope breaks. The pirogue lodges against a rock, pitching White House into the water. It turns in the current. White House disappears under it. Exterior, campsite, day. Men set up camp as Clark sponges blood from a gash on White House's head. Joe Field enters camp and gives Clark a dispatch. Clark reads it, smiles, calls out to the men.
Captain Lewis found the falls of the Missouri.
Sacagawea enters camp with a basket of berries. Clutching at her stomach, she drops the basket, berries spilling. Exterior, campsite, day. Lewis and Juilliard enter camp to find Ordway pacing back and forth, awkwardly holding a crying Pomp. Lewis gives him a quizzical look.
The woman took 6, sir.
Je prends le tipi. Planez matin. Allez de nouveau en Mandan.
He gives him a canoe. We took his teepee, take his women, go back to the Mandans.
Sacagawea lies in the shade of the teepee, Clark on bent knee beside her. Clark looks up anxiously at Lewis, and Juilliard join him.
God, if we lose her, what will we do about the child?
Lewis looks at him soberly, puts down his rifle, and goes down on one knee. Taking Sacagawea's wrist, he monitors her pulse, sits back on his heel, and considers her.
Juilliard, fetch some water from that sulfur spring we found.
Exterior, campsite, day, later. Clark holds a crying palm as Lewis offers a cup of water to Sacagawea. She turns her face away.
It smells bad, like eggs too old to be eaten.
Lewis lays a hand on Sacagawea's cheek, turning her head, forcing her to look at him. Pointing at Pomp, he taps his breast and shakes his head.
I'm unable to provide milk for your son. Only you can do that.
Lewis takes a sip from the cup, offers it to her.
Drink. It's good medicine.
Sacagawea looks up at Pomp, looks at Lewis. Putting her hand on the cup, she drinks, makes a wry face. Exterior, campsite, night, later. Men watch as Lewis picks a thorn from his foot.
I saw spray rising above the plains like a column of smoke. I was overjoyed to realize I'd found the falls of the Missouri. My God, the sound of it, the spectacle. To think something that grand has, from the beginning of time, lain concealed from the eyes of civilized man.
How long you figure it'll take to tote everything around it?
There's not one fall, but 5. A difficult portage of about 18 miles.
God almighty.
We'll have to leave the pirogues behind and catch some of our baggage to lighten the canoes. I've been thinking, if we can find a tree large enough, we can cut it crosswise to make wheels.
Exterior, near the falls, day. Roar of the unseen falls. Wooden wheels lurch across rocky terrain studded with prickly pear as men in harnesses pull a wagon, others pushing. On the wagon, a heavily laden canoe. Bolt of lightning, clap of thunder. McNeil steals a look at dark clouds rolling in, steps on a prickly pear.
God damn them prickly pear, all to hell.
Sudden onslaught of hail. Weiser's knocked unconscious. McNeil and Bratton drag him into the leeward side of the wagon. Men huddle against the wagon, arms over their heads. Exterior, ravine, day. Clark, Charbonneau, and Sacagawea stand under a shelf of rock as the rain and hail subsides. Sacagawea shrugs off the cradle, sets it down. Taking up Pomp, she holds him in her arms. The sound of the nearby falls seems to grow in volume. Clark looks up the ravine, head cocked, listening.
Flash flood! Out! Get out! We'll be swept into the falls!
Charbonneau clambers up the bank. Rifle in hand, Clark pushes Sacagawea ahead of him, his feet slipping. He sees water rushing toward them.
Charbonneau, give me your hand!
Charbonneau edges forward, takes Sacagawea's hand, pulls her up. The water strikes Clark. He clutches at a rock, hangs on as Pomp's cradle is swept past him. A dislodged boulder rolls down the ravine toward him. Sacagawea sets up a shrill keening. Jamming the butt of his rifle into the bank, he pulls himself up as the boulder strikes the shelf of the rock, shearing it away. Exterior, campsite, night. Battered, subdued men go through the line, Lewis spooning food onto their plates from a steaming kettle.
Gentlemen, I made suet dumplings by way of a special treat.
Men sit. Eye Lewis's dumplings. Willard looks around at the others, slices off a chunk, spears it with his knife, puts it in his mouth. He chews thoughtfully, nods and smiles in approval. The men dig in. Willard speaks softly to Ordway.
I ain't never seen no officer cook for his men before.
And the piece de resistance, gentlemen. The main dish. A dram of whiskey for each of you.
Exterior, campsite, night, later. Cruzette plays the fiddle. Men sip whiskey from tin cups, laughing as Gas teaches Shannon a bawdy song. Gas sings a line, Shannon repeating it.
I fear they're ruining young Shannon for polite society.
Clark laughs.
That was the last of our whiskey.
They exchange looks. Clark pulls up his legging and inspects a red spot on his ankle.
I think I've got a boil raising up.
Lewis looks at it, lays his hand on it, frowns.
It has a fever in it.
Exterior, near the falls, day. Weiser and McNeil hold the tongue of a wagon carrying a heavily packed canoe as Bratton and Willard raise a sail. The sail fills. Men cheers, the wagon jolts forward.
God damn, we're sailing on dry land.
Exterior, near the falls, day, continuous. Lewis reads the sextant. Clark stands, writing the field book. They look up at the sound of cheering, smile at the spectacle of the wagon moving forward under sail.
My God. With men such as these, we have everything to hope for, but little to fear.
Exterior, high plains, day. Clark, Lewis, Julliard, and Charbonneau look on as Sacagawea studies the terrain. She speaks softly.
Nous trouvons ma personne sur ce fleuve au sud les...
She says we'll find her people on the river or one just west of it.
I took Charbonneau and the Field brothers and went ahead in search of the Shoshones. Lewis didn't want me to go. Said he didn't like the looks of my ankle. I find it curious that red spot on my ankle comes near to changing the course of history.
Exterior, on the Missouri, day. Men pole canoes upstream, Lewis wielding pole in perfect synchronization with his crew.
You set a right tolerable pole, Captain.
Lewis smiles, sets his pole, pushes. Gas's pole slips on a stone. He falls against the gunwale. Tries to get up, cries out in pain. Lewis takes in the ailing walking on shore. Men limping, Cruzette holding his hand to his swollen jaw, Sacagawea trailing.
Let's call it a day.
Exterior near campsite, day, continuous. Willard spies a stunted pine. Dropping a meager armful of firewood, he starts trimming the pine with his hatchet. The blade slips. He looks down in surprise at blood running down his leg, pooling in his moccasin. Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. Men set up camp, hobbling on sore feet. Gas walking bent. Lewis pulls Cruzette's tooth, drops it in Ordway's basin. Shannon cocks his rifle and fires, flings a rattlesnake aside with the barrel of his rifle. Spies Willard approaching camp, his trouser leg dark with blood. Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. Willard winces as Lewis sutures his leg, Ordway sponging away blood.
Sufferings of our party would take up more of my journal than other notes. I scarcely find the time to set down.
Pryor patrols the perimeter of the camp. In the distance, dark figures shimmer in the heat. Pryor shades his eyes with his hand, makes out Joe and Reuben Fields supporting a limping Clark, Charbonneau trailing behind. Exterior, campsite, day, continuous. Clark flinches as Lewis probes at his swollen ankle.
The heat and prickly pear are so thick we could scarcely find a place to lie at night. I picked 17 thorns out of my feet last night.
Interior, teepee, night. Clark lies muttering, Lewis on bent knee beside him, Ordway holding up a candle lantern, Pryor looking on.
Oh, God. He's burning up with fever.
Exterior, Hancock plantation, day, Clark's dream. Clark, in deerskin clothing and moccasins, sits at a table on the lawn. His chair is too small, his knees sticking up. Judy Hancock, 14, pours tea. Watches anxiously as he takes a sip, laughs at his exaggerated look of pleasure. Clark takes in the well-kept lawn, lush trees, formal flower beds, a clump of prickly pear. Interior, teepee, night, present time. A flame flickering in darkness becomes a candle lantern. Lewis, a dark silhouette against the light, leaning close.
God, Will, don't you die on me. Closer! I can't see.
Ordway holds the lantern closer, light reflecting on the lancet in Lewis's hand. Pryor holding the basin at ready. Exterior, campsite, night, continuous. Sleeping men, shields, standing guard, talks with Gas.
All I know is Captain Lewis come and fetched Ordway and Pryor. I'm thinking Captain Clark must be powerful sick. What if he's too sick to go on? Can't go on without him, and we sure as hell can't stay here. Coulter says he might have walked nearly 30 miles yesterday. Didn't see no game.
Exterior, campsite, day. Clark sleeps on a buffalo robe in the shade of the tent. Lewis lifts the poultice and inspects Clark's ankle. Looks up as Sacagawea shyly sets a basket of berries beside Clark and walks away. Clark opens his eyes, focuses on Lewis.
Got to have horses to carry our supplies over the mountains.
I've decided to try to make it back to the Mandan villages before the river freezes over.
No. Go find the Shoshones and their horses.
You're not strong enough to attempt those mountains.
Go. Find the Shoshones.
Voulez-vous donner de bébé? Fais-le de vrai.
Charbonnet slaps Sacagawea. She cries out, runs. Lewis rises, strides forward, gives Charbonnet a shove.
You will not lay a hand on her again!
Charbonnet stalks off. Lewis looks at Crozet.
He says she picked berries for Captain Clark, make calf eyes at him.
Lewis looks at the men. They turn away, busy themselves. Exterior, campsite, night. Men sit eating, quiet, worried. Lewis looks at Sacagawea.
Ask her the Shoshone word for white man.
Juilliard signs. Sacagawea looks puzzled, shakes her head. Juilliard signs again. She considers it.
Tabombone.
Tababone.
Sacagawea nods. Interior, teepee, day. Ordway watches as Lewis goes down on one knee beside a sleeping Clark. Lewis lays a hand lightly on Clark's forehead, sits back on his heels, looks at him. Rising, he shrugs into his backpack.
See that you change his poultice daily. 5 to 10 drops of laudanum is needed.
What if the fever comes back on him?
Pray that doesn't happen, Sergeant. I left writings. You'll find them in my desk.
What kind of writing, sir?
They provide for the chain of command should anything happen to Captain Clark and myself. Good luck, Sergeant.
They shake hands. Ordway follows Lewis out of the teepee, watches him join Juilliard, Shields, and McNeil. Lewis settles into his long stride. McNeil, holding the flag on a staff, breaks into a trot to keep up. Exterior, foothills of the mountains, day. A rivulet of water tumbles over rocks. Lewis smiles.
Gentlemen, behold the headwaters of the Missouri.
Holding the flag on its staff, McNeil sets a foot on each side of the rivulet and spreads his arms.
Praise be to God. I lived to bestride what I was about convinced was the endless Missouri.
They laugh, cup their hands, and drink. Lewis rises and studies the rocky terrain. Sets out, McNeil breaking into a trot to keep up. As they emerge from a tumble of boulders, they spy an old Shoshone woman on her knees, digging roots with the jawbone of a deer, 2 young girls gathering them in a basket. Lewis puts down his rifle and approaches them.
Tababone. Tababone.
The old woman looks up and sets a shrill keening, the girls clinging to her. Lewis goes down on one knee, pulls up his sleeve to reveal his white skin.
Tababone. White man.
They look at his arm wonderingly. Lewis takes the old woman's hands and raises her to her feet, offers her a moccasin awl, gives the girls a strand of beads and a looking glass. Delighted, they examine their gifts.
Juilliard, tell her we wish to be taken to their village.
Juilliard signs. Taking up her jawbone and basket, the old woman leads the way, followed by the girls. A rumble like distant thunder. McNeil looks up at the cloudless sky. A Shoshone war party crests a rise. Lewis and his party halt as the old woman and girls continue on.
God almighty. They're all paying up for war and looking mighty out of sorts.
Lewis puts down his rifle. Taking the flag from McNeil, he strides forward. The war party reins to a halt. Talking excitedly, the old woman shows their gifts to the young Shoshone chief. Camelweight. Startled, he sees his image in the looking-glass. She pulls up her sleeve and points at Lewis. Dismounting, Camelweight approaches Lewis.
Tababone. White man.
With an air of great formality, Camelweight places his left arm around Lewis, pressing his right cheek to Lewis's.
Ahai! Ahai!
The war party dismounts and flocks forward, bestowing the ritual embrace upon Lewis and his men, pressing painted cheeks to theirs, crying, "Ahai! Ahai!" His cheeks smeared with war paint, Lewis looks at Shields, grins.
I find myself growing heartily tired of the national hug.
Juilliard signs with Camelweight, looks at Lewis.
Tababone means stranger, never having seen one before. The Shoshone have no word for white man.
Exterior, shore of the Missouri, day. Leaning on a cane, Clark walks with Charbonnet and Sacagawea, men pulling canoes on the river. Sacagawea cries out. On a knoll above them, Shoshones sit with their horses. Lewis and his party among them, Shoshone women and children approaching on foot. Lewis dismounts and joins Clark, seizing him joyfully by the shoulders.
My God, look at you. You're walking.
9 days and no word from you. I feared the worst.
Sacagawea runs. Talking and crying, she and another young woman embrace. Shoshones stare at York, who's intent on pulling a canoe ashore. Lewis smiles.
I told them we had a man with us who was black. They seem more anxious to see this monster than the trade goods I promised them.
Camwait dismounts and approaches York. York grins and offers his hand. The chief takes it, studies it. He pushes up York's sleeve and inspects his arm. Spitting on his fingers, he tries to rub the black off. Interior, Shoshone teepee, day. Clark, Lewis, and Juilliard sit with Camwait and 2 warriors as Charbonneau enters with Sacagawea in tow, her eyes downcast. Camwait looks at her with idle curiosity as Lewis speaks to Juilliard.
Inform the chief this woman is Shoshone and will be acting as our interpreter.
Sacagawea cries out. Rushing forward, she kneels and wraps her blanket around Camwait's shoulders, talking to him tearfully. Juilliard confers quietly with Charbonneau.
She asked the chief, "Do you not know me? I am your sister, who gave you berries to eat."
Exterior, Shoshone village, day. Holding the reins of a horse, a Shoshone watches as Lewis sets a folded blanket on the ground, a knife, a strand of blue beads. With an exclamation of pleasure, the Shoshone sits on his heels, takes up the beads, and inspects them. Lewis looks at Juilliard.
That makes 23 horses. I've hired a Shoshone guide. I believe we're ready to attempt the mountains.
Exterior, mountains, day. Leading pack horses, trailed by 2 colts, Sacagawea with Pomp on her back, the party follows their Shoshone guide, Old Toby, up a mountain trail. Men scrabble for footholds, horses bounding.
You reckon we get to the top, we'll see the Pacific?
Sure hope the other side ain't as steep as this one.
They reach the summit. Stunned, they contemplate mountains as far as the eye can see.
God Almighty.
Old Toby walks on. Exterior, campsite, night. Men spoon soup from tin cups, exchange glances.
Begging your pardon, sir, but what manner of food is this?
It's dried soup. It was made by a French chef in Philadelphia.
If I wasn't half starved, I doubt I could bring myself to eat it.
There's no game to be had. It's all we've got. We have enough to last 5 days. I hope to be through the mountains by then.
Exterior, mountains, day. Clark's pack horse stumbles. Jerking the reins from his hand, it rolls down loose shale, straps breaking, Clark's trunks bounding end over end. Exterior, mountains, day. Men spy Sacagawea and Old Toby picking berries and rush to join them. They stand, stripping berries from branches, cramming them into their mouths.
We'll butcher a colt.
Juilliard nods, walks away, raises his rifle, and takes a bead on a colt, the gunshot echoing. Exterior, mountains, day. Men lead pack horses along a narrow valley by a stream. Lewis spies a wolf watching from a distance. Men stop as Lewis cocks his rifle and takes careful aim. The shot echoes along the valley as the wolf goes down.
God Almighty. That was some shot, Captain. Must have been well over 200 yards. There ain't enough meat on him for even one man.
We make soup, Sergeant. Soup wiser. Crack the marrow bones and see that you add a good measure of salt to it.
Exterior, campsite, day. Mounds of snow stir, sit up, reveal themselves as men under buffalo robes. McNeil notes a ruined sock like a bracelet on his ankle, takes a tattered piece of blanket from his knapsack, tears off a strip, winds it around his foot. Exterior, campsite, night. Hollow-eyed men sit gazing into campfires. Ordway looks around.
God, this is a lonesome place.
What about eating one of them pack horses, Captain?
Which one would you have us eat first, Sergeant? Perhaps the one carrying your winter clothing.
Silence. Men gaze into campfires.
Sir, we've been wondering, we get to the Pacific, how are we going to get back without no provisions?
The President provided me with letters of credit. I'm to buy provisions from sailing ships that stop at the coast to trade with the Indians.
Lewis gives Clark a look, rises and walks away. Clark follows. Lewis looks up at a starry sky, circumscribed by dark, looming mountains.
14 days of mountains and no end in sight. I have nothing to give them. They grow weaker by the day.
I'll take a hunting party ahead tomorrow.
Exterior, mountains, day. A straggling line of men lead pack horses, Sacagawea riding. McNeil, foot trailing a strip of rag, stumbles over a snow-shrouded object, the skull of a horse. Whitehouse helps him up, picks up a moccasin, puts it back on McNeil's foot. McNeil lurches on. At the head of the line, Lewis leads his pack horse, following old Toby along an icy stream.
We got a man down.
Lewis hands his reins to Bratton, walks back down the line. Ordway sits on his haunches beside McNeil, men looking on. Gas comes up from the rear, stumbles, sinks to the ground, still clinging to his reins. Crossing his arm over his bent knees, he lays his head on his arms. Lewis takes McNeil's wrist and feels for a pulse, sits back on his heels, looks at him.
He's still living?
Yes.
York scoops up McNeil and slings him over his shoulder. Lewis rises and looks at Gas.
On your feet, Sergeant.
Don't think I can do this no more.
Then we all stay here. I expect it's as good a place as any to die.
God damn it, Cap.
Gas struggles to get to his feet. Shields takes his arm, helps him up. Lewis rises, speaks privately to Ordway.
Take the rear. See that they stay together.
Lewis returns to the head of the line. Exterior, mountains, evening, later. Following old Toby, Lewis leads his pack horse along a stream. The dog runs forward, tail wagging. Lewis stops, looks at dark shapes approaching in a landscape of black and white. Reuben Field on a horse, leading a pack horse. The image blurs and sways. Reuben dismounts, speaks, his voice echoing distantly.
I'm up on a village of Indians, sir. Captain Clark traded for food and sent me back with it.
Lewis goes to his knees and falls face down in the snow. Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. The party straggles into the village. Lewis rides slumped on a horse, led by Reuben Field. He dismounts, his knees buckling. Clark catches him in his arms. Interior, tent in Nez Perce village, day. Clark rouses a sleeping Lewis, offers him a cup.
Drink, it's meat broth. I traded 2 fish hooks for a dog.
The men?
All sick, and all asking about you.
Querulous voice of an old woman. Clark looks up. Framed by the open flap of the tent, she leans, wizened and bent on the arm of a younger woman, scolding 3 Nez Perce men.
The Nez Perce didn't know what to make of us. They decided to kill us. But among them was an old woman who'd been captured by the Blackfeet and sold to a white trader. She told them, these are the people of the white skin. They treated me well. Do them no harm.
Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. Nez Perce watch as Clark distributes pills to the men. Ordway following with a bucket of water and a ladle. Chief Twisted Hair signs to Juilliard.
He asks what is this strange food you give your warriors.
Delamint's medicine.
Juilliard signs. The Nez Perce consider it in silence. Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. Clark sits writing in his journal. The dog rises to greet Lewis as he emerges from the tent. Lewis sits, gives Clark a wan smile, raises his face to the sun. Juilliard approaches with a lame Nez Perce, addresses Clark.
He says he's been lame for many moons. He was told you're a medicine man. He asks that you make him well.
Clark and Lewis exchange musing looks. Clark rises.
I'll fetch some liniment.
Exterior, near Nez Perce village, day. Men chip charred wood from dugout canoes.
I come near to dying in them mountains. If Captain Lewis hadn't got me so riled up, I'd likely still be sitting there.
I don't think Captain Lewis has got any to give up to him.
I reckon the rest would be easy. We just sit in these here canoes and float on down to the Pacific.
Exterior, canoe on the Columbia, day. A narrow passage of water churns between cliffs. Shields plies his oar, spray hitting him in the face.
God almighty.
Cruzat extends an oar, sets it against a rock, pushes the canoe clear. It goes over a fall and noses into the water. Gas bailing frantically. Exterior, cliff above the Columbia, continuous. Old Toby watches canoes tossing below. He wants no part of it. Shaking his head, he sets out upstream, meeting Flathead Indians hurrying downriver.
Lewis had correctly surmised our descent to the ocean would be rapid. In view of our certain demise, the natives ran ahead, hoping to salvage what they could from the river. We shot rapids, we carried canoes, we lowered them down falls with ropes. When at last we reached the lower Columbia, we found ourselves hemmed in by cliffs, night coming on, some of the men seasick.
Exterior, lower Columbia, evening. Wind and rain. Canoes tossing, men rowing and bailing. Bratton clutches at the gunwale, vomits over the side. Clark spies a niche in the cliffs, a debris-littered beach.
Put into larboard shore.
Exterior, campsite on the Columbia, morning. Lewis lies on the rotting hollow of a fallen tree, a buffalo robe hooded over his head. Wind, rain, a clap of thunder. He opens his eyes to a narrow view of Willard asleep on a slab of driftwood, moving forward, backward, forward. Lewis sits up. Sleeping men are set afloat on slabs of driftwood. A canoe adrift.
All men up! Secure the canoes. We're getting incoming tide from the ocean.
Exterior, campsite on the Columbia, day, continuous. Wind and rain, clap of thunder. The party huddles against the cliff, buffalo robes hooded over their heads, debris lapping at their feet.
We were 2 days at that place. We had nothing to eat. As soon as the storm abated, we set out. We sent Shannon and Joe Field ahead to hunt. Shannon come up on an Indian village. It looked to have been recently abandoned. We sought shelter there for the night.
Exterior, near the Columbia, day. Sacagawea sits picking at Pomp's hair. The dog scratches. Discarded clothing litters the shore. Men stand naked in the water, shivering, scratching, cursing.
God damn place is crawling with fleas.
Lewis laughs. Men look at him, at each other, laugh. Exterior, point of land above the Pacific, day. An overcast day, pounding surf. Men look out over the Pacific. Sacagawea's eyes are wide with astonishment. The dog runs along the beach below, setting seagulls to flight. The Field brothers chase a receding wave, then run, shouting and laughing as another comes at them.
You would be considerable improved by some sunshine and a sailing ship lying at anchor.
The party makes their way back inland. Clark stops, takes his knife from his belt, and starts carving on a tree. Exterior, point of land above the Pacific, day. Wind and rain, pounding surf. The point is deserted. On the tree, Clark's inscription, W.M. Clark, by land, 1805. Exterior, site of future Fort Clatsop, day. Birdsong, honking of ducks and geese. Clark, Lewis, and Drouillard watch men notch and set logs in a line of huts. A Clatsop Indian approaches, wearing the hat, coat, and pantaloons of an English sailor, the coat adorned with mismatched buttons. He carries an otter pelt, offers it for inspection.
Son of a beach, damn rascal. You got brass buttons.
Lewis examines the pelt.
I'd say this gentleman has met with English-speaking sailors. Ask him when the sailing ships come to this coast.
Drouillard and the Indian confer in sign language.
He says the big ships are a long time gone, come again in 3 moons.
Lewis offers a knife in exchange for the otter pelt. The Indian looks at it with contempt.
You got brass buttons.
Exterior, parade ground, Fort Clatsop, day. The men stand assembled. Lewis glances at 2 Indians squatting by some stacked firewood, inspecting a hatchet. He nods at Ordway. Ordway and Drouillard firmly escort the 2 Indians out of the fort. Ordway swings the gates shut on their startled faces, sets the crossbar.
Gentlemen, several items have gone missing, among them Sergeant Floyd's tomahawk. We regret the loss of it, as we had planned to give it to his family. New rule of order. The gates are to be kept closed at all times.
Sudden downpour of rain.
We're running out of salt. Joe Field, Bratton, Gibson, take 5 of our largest kettles and proceed to the coast, where you will set up camp and commence boiling salt from seawater. Company dismissed.
Men hurry to their quarters. Interior, officers' quarters, night. Rain drums on the roof. Clark spears a chunk of meat, looks at it, sniffs at it, looks at Lewis, quietly eating, a shoulder protruding from his rotting shirt.
Our meat's gone bad again.
I've learned to think if the cord be strong enough that binds the body and soul together, it doesn't matter so much what comprises it.
The candle lantern spurs and goes out. The room is lit by firelight.
That was our last candle.
Christmas, Fort Clatsop.
Clark laughs. They continue eating in silence. Interior, officers' quarters, day. Rain drums on the roof. Lewis stands watching as Clark draws a master map from his sketches, looks up as Willard enters.
Joe Field sent a bushel of salt. Said to tell you they've been keeping them kittles boiling all night.
They sighted any sailing ships?
No, sir. Sir, Bratton's took sick.
I'll send a man to replace him.
I reckon you'll have to send a couple men to fetch him, sir. He can't walk.
Clark and Lewis look at him. Interior, enlisted men's quarters, day. Rain drums on the roof. Lewis rubs liniments on Bratton's back. Shields and McNeil sit sewing moccasins.
6 weeks I've been laying here listening to it rain.
Bratton succumbs to a fit of coughing. Lewis waits for it to pass. Continues rubbing his back.
I was thinking I won't be seeing Kentucky again.
Lewis's hand goes still. Shields and McNeil look up. Interior, officers' quarters, night. Clark and Lewis sit eating. From somewhere nearby, a violent fit of coughing. A sudden downpour of rain on the roof. Clark looks up as Lewis puts down his knife and shoves his plate aside. Lewis rises and goes to the fireplace, stands looking into the fire.
I doubt Bratton will survive a return journey through the mountains.
They look at each other.
Where are the sailing ships? I'd hoped to send Bratton back by sea with copies of our journals and your map. They might know what we have done. And provisions? My God, we have no provisions for our return journey.
Exterior, parade ground, Fort Clatsop, day. Clark and Juilliard watch as Lewis gives Chief Commonweal a letter.
Tell him by this letter, our great chief will know the people of the Clatsop Nation are our friends. He is to give it to the captain of the first American ship that comes to call. Make certain he understands. An American ship, not British.
Juilliard signs. Chief Commonweal nods. Exterior, parade ground, Fort Clatsop, day. Lewis looks at the men in their tattered clothing, at Bratton lying on a litter. Reads from a paper.
The object of this list is to make it known to the world that the party whose names are here inscribed did penetrate to the Pacific Ocean on the 14th of November, 1805, from whence they departed the 23rd of March, 1806, by the same way they came out. Gentlemen, it is our privilege to establish a claim to the Oregon Territory in the name of the United States of America.
Men cheer as Lewis and Ordway enter the officers' quarters and post the proclamation on the wall. Exterior, shore of the Columbia, day. Lewis holds his uniform coat by the shoulders as a Flathead Indian inspects it. Juilliard looks at Lewis and nods. Lewis surrenders the coat, turns away as the Indian puts it on, stands looking at a canoe.
We set out on our return journey, trading kettles, personal items, the last of our tobacco, even the buttons off our uniforms for what little food we could get. At a personal cost of $136, Lewis traded his uniform coat, an officer's most prized possession, for a canoe.
Exterior, campsite, night. Sleeping men, Shields and McNeil standing guard. Shields spies Indians watching from the shadows. He cocks his rifle. The Indians run.
I believe it was only our rifles and the size of our party that kept us from being overrun and murdered by the natives.
Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. An American flag is flying in the village as the party approaches. Shields and York carrying Bratton on a litter.
Looky there, Will. Them Nez Perce are flying a flag we give 'em on our way to Pacific.
Nez Perce come forward to greet them. The man Clark treated for lameness intercepts him, feigning a limp, then pacing briskly back and forth to demonstrate how well he can walk. Clark looks at him in astonishment. Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. Clark stands at the head of a line of ailing Nez Perce, putting drops in a man's eyes. Lewis joins him.
You seem to be their favorite physician.
The recovery of the man I treated for lameness has given them an insulted opinion of my skills.
A Nez Perce woman adds a basket of roots to a stockpile of food.
One of my patients gave me 9 dogs in payment for my services.
Thanks to you, we eat.
Lewis notes Bratton lying on a litter, watching Coulter and the Field brothers run foot races with young Nez Perce men.
John Shields says he's heard of some men like Bratton cured by means of a sweat bath.
Exterior, Nez Perce village, day. A crowd has assembled to watch as Shields and York, cloaked in stream, remove Bratton from a frame of bent willows covered with buffalo robes. They place him on a litter and carry him ruddy and sweating toward the river.
What are you doing? Good God, that river's cold as ice. You can't.
They dump him in the river. He comes up flailing and gasping. They pull him out and set him on his feet. He reaches out to Shields for support.
Damn it, Will. Walk.
Bratton takes a faltering step, walks haltingly toward Shields. Tears streaming down his face, he sets his hands on Shields' shoulders. Shields embraces him. Cheering men gather around. Lewis looks at Clark and smiles. Exterior, mountains, day. The party rides along a mountainside, Clark in the lead. Neigh of a horse. Clark looks back. Lewis's horse has lost its footing. Lewis springs from the saddle, horse and rider sliding and rolling down loose shale.
That summer of 1806 began to seem as though some dark fate was stalking Lewis. On the 1st of July, we left those terrible mountains behind. While I explored the Yellowstone, Lewis took a party north to determine the latitude of Maria's River, that Mr. Jefferson might be informed of the northernmost boundaries of Louisiana. We agreed to meet in 1 month at the mouth of the Yellowstone.
Exterior, along Maria's River, day. Lewis and the Field brothers sit their horses. Lewis looks through his spyglass at 8 mounted Blackfeet intent on watching the river below.
I expect they're Blackfeet. I'd hope to avoid an interview with them. We might slip around unnoticed, but they've spied Juilliard hunting by the river, and there's no way of warning him.
Lewis considers it in silence for a long moment.
Raise the flag.
Jofield raises the flag as Lewis leads them forward.
I expect we're about to have some difficulties with these gentlemen.
Exterior, campsite, day. Clark sits on a log, stirring the ashes of a dead fire with a stick. Men look at him, exchange glances.
Captain Lewis and Sergeant Gass and their parties were 10 days past our appointed time to meet. I'd begun to fear the worst.
17-month-old Pomp toddles up to Clark. Clark smiles at him and whistles a jaunty tune. As men grin as Pomp dances, unnoticed, the dog rises and looks upstream. Shouts from the river. Men cheer as the white pirogue and 5 canoes put in to shore. Lewis is nowhere to be seen. At the bow of the white pirogue, Gass swings over the rail and wades ashore to join Clark.
We got Captain Lewis in a pirogue, sir. They was hunting in willows by the river. Brisette mistook him for an elk and shot him. I helped him bandage it best I could, but I sure ain't no doctor.
Exterior campsite, day, continuous. Lewis lies face down on a buffalo robe. Ordway holds a basin of water as Clark picks at a bandage on Lewis's buttocks. Lewis flinches. With a grimace, Clark moistens the bandage with water from a basin.
We met up with 8 Blackfeet on the Marias. We counseled with them and made camp together. At dawn, they tried to make off with our rifles and horses. Unarmed and afoot, it was not acceptable.
Exterior campsite on the Marias, morning, flashback. Joe Field stands guard, his head nodding. Blackfeet rise from their blankets and creep forward. Juilliard wakens as a Blackfoot tries to ease his rifle from his grasp.
Damn you, let go of my rifle.
Lewis wakes, sees a Blackfoot running off with his rifle. Drawing his pistol, he sets out in pursuit. The Blackfoot turns and raises the rifle. Lewis fires. The Blackfoot looks down at blood darkening a hole in his shirt. Looks at Lewis. Cocks the rifle. Fires. Exterior, campsite, present time. Clark pulls the old bandage loose, exposing an ugly wound.
I felt the wind of his bullet as it passed by my head.
Captain? Captain Lewis?
I think he fainted, sir.
Exterior, Mandan village, day. Mandans gather around Chief Sheheke and his wife and son. Men somber, women weeping and wailing. Sheheke is wearing his military coat and cocked hat.
We proceeded on to the Mandan villages. The Mandan chief had decided to accept Mr. Jefferson's invitation to visit him. Unknown to us, the Arikara chief we'd sent to meet the president in the spring of 1805 had fallen ill and died in the city of Washington. His death would have the most dire and far-reaching of consequences.
Clark shakes hands with Charbonneau. Stooping, he takes Pomp's hand and shakes it. He looks at Sacagawea.
Tell her she deserves far more reward than I have in my power to give.
Sacagawea watches Juilliard's sign, looks at Clark, smiles, and shyly casts her gaze downward. Impatient, Charbonneau walks away. Scooping up Pomp, she hurries after him. She looks back, then vanishes from sight among milling Mandans. Exterior, white pirogue, day. The pirogue and canoes move rapidly downstream. On shore, a cow looks up, a bell tinkling at her neck.
Look, a cow.
The men plied the oars eagerly. We were making 70 to 80 miles a day. In a little over a month, we found ourselves nearing St. Louis.
Downstream, people standing on shore, men loading flatboats. The men of the expedition break into a cheer, some firing their rifles into the air. Those on shore look up. 2 men carrying a crate freeze in position. As the boats put in, Lewis slips over the side and wades ashore, the dog leaping after him. French businessman, Pierre Chouteau, 48, grins.
It's the expedition!
Startled silence, then people cheer, men fire rifles. Lewis joins Chouteau, shouts to make himself heard.
Has the post rider gone?
Chouteau takes in Lewis's beard and long hair.
You are Robinson Crusoe, no? Mon Dieu, Captain! We think you are dead. The whole country, she think you are dead. The Spanish, they sent out patrols looking for you. We think they catch you, kill you. Cut off your ears. Give to Spanish governor.
Interior, bedroom, sitting room, day. Clark and Lewis sit writing letters. Lewis looks at Clark, dips his quill in his ink pot, and continues writing.
With respect to that estimable man, Captain William Clark, if, sir, any credit be due for the success of that arduous enterprise in which we have been mutually engaged, he is equally with myself entitled to your consideration and that of our country.
Interior, bedroom, sitting room, night, continuous. Lewis lies in one of 2 4-posters. Clark rubs a hand musingly over a freshly shaven cheek, blows out the lamp and settles himself in the other bed. A fire crackles in the fireplace, light flickering on the walls.
Feather beds.
Yes, I'd forgotten how soft they are.
Clopping of horses' hooves, sound of a wagon passing.
I'm anxious to learn the state of my friends, particularly whether my mother is yet living.
Interior, bedroom, sitting room, morning. Clopping of horses' hooves, wagons, and carriages passing. Clark wakes, notes Lewis's empty bed. rises, sees Lewis asleep on his buffalo robe on the floor. Clark smiles, stands looking down at him with undisguised affection. Interior, a winter ball, night. Lewis, in dress uniform, waltzes with a young lady. Everyone's talking about you, Captain.
And what is it they say about me?
They say you're a hero, back from the dead.
Ah, but I was never for a moment dead.
Lewis surrenders himself to the waltz with joyous abandon, whirling her around the floor. Interior, President's house, day. Petite leads Clark to the east room, knocks lightly at the door, opens it. Lewis lies fully clothed on the bed. Wan and haggard, he sits up as Petite opens the draperies.
My God, this look terrible.
Mr. Jefferson refers to us as a trio of invalids. He's taken to his bed with one of his headaches. His son-in-law, Thomas Randolph, was taken ill at his boarding house. I was obliged to gather up Mr. Randolph and bring him here.
Petite fetches a chair.
Mr. Randolph was very ill, sir. Captain Lewis refused to leave his side for a moment.
Petite goes to the washstand, takes up a pitcher, and pours water into a matching bowl. Exits. Lewis rises and splashes water on his face.
We laid out your map on the floor, got down on our hands and knees and went over it. Mr. Jefferson pronounced it masterful.
Taking up a towel, Lewis dries his face and hands.
How did you fare in Virginia? Did Miss Hancock serve you tea in the garden?
When Harriet Kennerly heard of our engagement, she said, "My pretty cousin is going to marry that homely man."
Lewis laughs, goes to the sideboard, pours 2 whiskeys.
And you? Has anyone caught the eye of the celebrated hero?
The young lady pleaded a previous commitment. I never felt less like a hero.
Lewis gives Clark a troubled look.
Henry Dearborn refused to raise your rank to captain. However, you're going to be offered a post as Superintendent of Indian Affairs, the accompanying rank of Brigadier General of the Louisiana Militia.
My God.
Congress has also approved my appointment as Governor of Louisiana. You, my friend, I should be very much in need of your counsel.
I was thinking about going into the mercantile business.
Grins, raises his glass. They touch glasses, drink. Interior, Lewis's office, day. Clark enters. Lewis takes in his grim expression, puts down his quill, and rises. Super, St. Louis, 1 year later.
The expedition charged with returning the Mandan chief to his village was set upon and turned back by the Arikar. 3 men killed, 10 wounded. Joe Field died en route back to St. Louis.
My God, the Mandan chief and his family.
Pryor brought them back to St. Louis.
Lewis goes to the window, stands looking out.
The Arikar are enraged at the death of their chief in Washington. They closed the river to all traffic. George Shannon was among the wounded. While en route back down the river, gangrene set in. Dr. Farr was forced to amputate his leg just above the knee.
Where is he?
Interior, sick room, day. Lewis looks at Shannon lying pale and still, notes a stain on the coverlet, lifts the bedding. Frowning, he surveys the soiled bandage on Shannon's stump. Interior, kitchen, day, continuous. The matron and a French servant girl look up in surprise as Lewis storms into the kitchen.
Madam, I direct you to make a proper broth. Crack the marrow bones. See that you put a fair measure of salt in it.
Your Excellency, the young man has stopped eating. Dr. Farrar says 'tis but a matter of time.
By God, I'll see that he eats.
Matilda, start a broth. Be quick about it, girl. The servant girl snatches up a kettle and exits.
May I inquire when his bandages were changed?
Sir, I expect Dr. Farrar has been delayed by lying in. The wife of a very important man with the first child, you never know.
Fetch me water and bandages.
Dr. Farrar is in charge of the young man's care.
Madam, I shall answer to Dr. Farrar, and he to me.
Interior, sick room, day, continuous. The matron holds a cup of broth as Lewis lays a hand on Shannon's shoulder. Eyes closed, Shannon moans and turns his head away. You'll not get him to eat, Your Excellency. I tried.
Madam, if you'd be so kind as to leave us.
Affronted, the matron sets the cup on a bedside table and marches out. Lewis gives Shannon a cuff on the cheek.
God.
Shannon flails weakly at the air, opens his eyes, focuses on Lewis.
Shannon, listen to me. You have your land grant. We'll get you a disability pension. You can afford the finest university. By God, you're going to make a good life for yourself. But first, we eat.
Interior, Frederick Bates' office, day. Frederick Bates, a handsome man of 31, sits writing. Wearing his military coat and cocked hat, the Mandan chief sits watching him. Bates looks up. Sheheke looks back. Bates frowns and continues writing. Looks up again. Sheheke looks back. Bates throws down his quill. Rising, he stalks out.
Along with the corruption and turmoil left by his predecessor, General Wilkinson, Lewis inherited Territorial Secretary Frederick Bates. What Lewis never knew is Bates had applied as Jefferson's secretary in 1801, a position given unsolicited to Lewis.
Interior, Lewis's office, day, continuous. Lewis looks up in surprise as Bates storms into his office.
The man-in-chief was so bold as to enter my office without invitation.
I'll speak to him.
He just sits there looking at me.
It seems our opinions of him differ.
We differ on everything, Your Excellency.
Secretary Bates, I'm at a loss to determine what I've done that has offended you. If you'd be so kind as to explain, perhaps we might reach some manner of agreement.
I am not obliged to explain myself to you, sir.
Wearily, Lewis puts down his quill and follows Bates. Interior, Lewis's office, day, continuous. The Mandan chief sits watching Lewis write. Lewis looks at him, sets paper before him, offers him a quill, makes writing motions with it. Sheheke takes it, dips it carefully in Lewis's ink pot, makes a mark on the paper, looks at Lewis and smiles. Lewis smiles back. Lewis and Sheheke sit writing. Interior, parlor, William Clark home, day. A black servant conducts Lewis to the parlor. Clark sets his newspaper aside and rises. Judy Hancock Clark, 17, and large with child, sits embroidering an infant's gown. Lewis bows to her in a courtly manner.
Madam, my apologies for intruding.
You are forgiven, Governor. Lewis takes a letter from his vest. Unfolding it, he offers it to Clark. Clark takes it, reads.
Mr. Jefferson asks about my intentions about returning the Mandan chief and his family to their village. He advises against a lengthy military expedition. I fear war with Great Britain may be imminent.
Alarmed, Judy looks up.
My God. The Missouri Fur Company might be able to provide an armed escort. The situation with the Arikara being what it is, our trappers are sitting idle. I know Mr. Jefferson assumes your written account of our journey to the Pacific is nearly ready for the publisher.
He's promised copies to his friends. I don't know how to tell them. I've not had time to write a word of it.
My friend, I think Mr. Jefferson expects too much of you. Will you take supper with us?
Old bachelors should not oblige their friends to entertain them. Madam, may I wish you a pleasant evening?
Judy looks up, smiles. As Lewis exits, she returns to her needlework. Clark stands looking into the fire. He's in need of a wife.
I hope something might come of it when we brought my niece west with us.
He seems too preoccupied with affairs of the state to pay her proper attention. Young ladies of the governor's social standing aren't eager to be swept away to a frontier outpost like St. Louis.
You weren't dissuaded by it.
I was too young to know better. Interior, Lewis's office, day. Lewis sits at his desk, writing. Clark enters, grinning.
Judy has presented me with a fine son. We've named him Meriwether Lewis Clark.
Stunned, Lewis looks at him, his eyes welling with tears. Rising, he seizes Clark by the shoulders and waltzes him grandly around the room. Clark laughs.
That spring, a second expedition set out to return the Mandan chief to his village. Lewis submitted a voucher to the War Department for expenses, but by that time James Madison had assumed the presidency. He chose William Eustis as his Secretary of War.
Interior, Clark's office, day. Clark sits writing, looks up as Lewis enters, plainly distraught. Clark puts down his quill, rises.
William Eustis has refused to honor my voucher for returning the Mandan chief to his village.
My God, they're well on their way up the Missouri.
Lewis paces as Clark pours 2 whiskeys.
If I'm held personally responsible for these expenditures, it will break me. I must try to set this matter right. As soon as I've put my affairs in order, I intend to proceed to New Orleans and then around by sea to Washington.
Clark intercepts Lewis, takes him by the arm, sits him in a chair, gives him a whiskey, pulls another chair close to his, sits.
Listen to me. The territory was in a state of turmoil when you arrived here. You restored peace and prosperity. No man could have done more. I'm confident it will all come out to your credit.
Lewis looks at his whiskey.
Judy has been anxious to visit her family. We'll proceed overland and I'll join you in Washington.
Lewis gives him a grateful look. Clark smiles and raises his glass. They touch glasses, drink. Exterior, William Clark home, day. Lewis's mulatto servant, John Pernier, stands by the carriage as Clark and Lewis talk. Lewis is wearing a white riding gown with blue stripes. He lays a hand on Clark's arm.
You're right, of course. I expect an explanation is all that's necessary to put matters right. I'll see you in Washington then. I have our journals. I'll take them to the publisher and see what's to be done about them.
Lewis enters the carriage, followed by Pernier. Judy comes down the walk and takes Clark's arm. They stand watching the carriage depart down the street.
I don't believe there was ever an honester man in Louisiana, nor one with purer motives than Governor Lewis. The Mandan chief was returned to his village 18 days after Lewis left for Washington. 2 years later, William Eustis quietly honored Lewis's voucher. It was but one of many he had refused. His policies would eventually force his resignation.
Interior, George Rogers' house, day. Clark sits reading a letter. He looks up.
Governor Lewis says there's talk on the river about the British stopping American ships at sea. Fearing his papers and our journals might fall into the hands of the British, he's decided to proceed on to the city of Washington by way of the Natchez Trace.
By God, I'd rather fight a whole regiment of British soldiers than one goddamn bureaucrat.
Exterior, Shelbyville, Kentucky, day. As Clark makes his way toward his carriage, a passerby calls out from the opposite side of the street.
General, wait up!
The passerby waits for a wagon to pass. Joins Clark.
I'm right sorry to hear about the death of Governor Lewis, sir.
My God, what are you saying?
It's in the Frankfurt Argus, General. Says he killed himself on the Natchez Trace while en route to Washington.
Clark looks at him, turns on his heel and makes way toward his waiting carriage.
I'm sorry, sir. I thought surely you knew.
A servant opens the carriage door for Clark. A young black woman holds 9-month-old Meriwether Lewis Clark as Judy plays peekaboo behind her fan. Judy looks up, takes in Clark's stricken expression. My dear, what is it? What's happened? Interior, East Room, the President's house, day. Isaac Coles, 29, takes packets of papers from a trunk and thumbs through them, setting them to one side. Clark opens a second trunk to find a jumble of Lewis's clothing and personal items. His eyes welling with tears, he takes up Lewis's white riding gown with blue stripes, the last thing he saw Lewis wearing. Coles looks at him, looks away, takes up another packet of papers.
Lewis's trunks were brought on to Washington, where I was called to the painful task of helping Presidential Assistant Isaac Coles make an inventory of their contents.
Coles thumbs through another packet of papers.
Was he casual in his personal habits? His public and private papers are all mixed together.
Clark looks at him, takes up a packet, thumbs through it.
He was the most precise man I've ever known.
Interior, library, Monticello, day. Petite ushers Clark to the library. Jefferson stands at the window, hands clasped behind his back.
General Clark, sir.
Jefferson turns and looks at Clark as Petite exits.
I well recall last time we were together in this room, General. It was a time of great expectation.
Eyes brimming, Jefferson turns back to the window.
This deplorable accident has deprived the nation of one of her most valuable citizens.
We found the governor's trunks in great disarray.
So I have been told.
It was as though someone had gone through them in great haste.
There's a letter on the table, General. It was written by a man who happened to be traveling with the governor. He's a government official. He signs himself James Neely, U.S. agent to the Chickasaw Nation.
Clark takes up the letter, reads.
I've read it so many times I have it committed to memory. The governor very ill, at times deranged in mind. Mr. Neely remaining behind to hunt 2 horses that had strayed. The governor proceeding on to the house of a Mr. Grinder, where sometime in the night he took up his pistols and shot himself in the head and breast. The governor's mother has been placed in the deepest affliction. He'd written her expressing his eagerness to see her again. He said he'd planned to look up some old friends. She's managed to convince herself he was killed by his servant.
This James Neely states he has certain personal effects in his care. The governor's rifle and watch, his pistols. They weren't with his trunks. The governor's purse is also missing.
These items may yet turn up. Perhaps Mr. Neely intends to deliver them personally to Governor Lewis's family.
Sir, are you aware of a letter Governor Lewis wrote to Amos Stoddard while en route to Washington?
Major Stoddard has informed me about the letter.
Governor Lewis was requesting a sum of money that was due him. He told Stoddard, "You will direct to me at the city of Washington until the last of December, after which time I shall be on my return to St. Louis." Sir, doesn't it strike you those aren't the words of a man who intends to end his life?
I expect it was written during one of his lucid moments, General. Did you know the governor's servant has also taken his own life? He was found dead in his room in Washington.
Exterior, Natchez Trace, day. Clark rides a densely wooded trail. Call of a crow. He reins in his horse and looks down his back trail. Takes up his rifle and lays it across the saddle. Rides on.
In the late spring of 1810, while on my return from Washington, I went looking for Lewis's grave. An innkeeper in Nashville warned me that the trace was frequented by thieves and murderers who preyed on lone travelers.
Clark comes up on a settlement. Cabins, a blacksmith shop, a tavern. Dismounting in front of the tavern, he loops the reins over the rail. Loud voices and laughter issue from within. Interior, tavern, day, continuous. As one, they look up as Clark enters. Barkeep, card players and spectators. A man with a scar on his face, sitting alone. The game resumes. Occurs. Hoots of laughter.
How far do grinders stand?
Silence. A hand about to play a card stops in midair. A mug halts on its way to a mouth, poised to receive it.
It's a smithy you'll be wanting. Robert Cooper. His name is.
Interior, blacksmith shop, day, continuous. Robert Cooper, 40, quenches an angerin in a barrel of black water. Lewis looks at Clark questioningly.
Sir, I was told you might direct me to grinder's stand.
Cooper puts the andiron on a scarred wood workbench beside its mate, compares them for symmetry.
The grave, is it?
Yes.
You care to tell me why I become looking?
Clark's eyes glisten with tears.
I need to know how he lies.
Cooper looks at him, looks away, considers it. Takes his shirt from the workbench and wipes sweat from his face. Takes up his pistol, powder horn, and shot pouch.
Got to fetch me a horse.
Exterior, grinder's stand, day, continuous. Cooper sits his horse, eyeing two cabins separated by a breezeway. Behind them a stable and a privy. He dismounts. Clark follows suit. Cooper leads Clark across the clearing adjacent to the cabins.
Don't see no smoke coming from the chimney. Expect they're off at their farm on Duck River. Nobody much comes here since it happened.
Cooper stops, takes in a mound of uprooted earth, rails thrown over it in disarray. Gives Clark a wary look.
I'd have known Grinder wouldn't trouble himself to put a fence around it.
God, is this is Governor Lewis's grave?
This wild hog's been here since. Blasted things everywhere.
Cooper turns a chunk of torn sod with the toe of his boot, presses it back into place.
He sent for me. Said the governor of Louisiana killed himself at Grinder's and would I make spikes for a coffin. Felled a tree, split it in lengths and spiked it together.
You were here?
Aye. I helped him lay up for burial.
Cooper nudges a rail into place with the toe of his boot.
We knew he was on the trace. Travelers coming through seen him. They said he'd been ill, but he was in good spirits. He was regaling them with stories about going to the Pacific. They thought him the grandest man in the world, sir.
Clark blinks back, tears. Cooper looks away.
Mrs. Grinder said he rode up about sunset. Followed sometime later by a servant, and a colored boy Neely found to help him with his trunks. Grinder wasn't about. Off at the farm, she said. No folks hereabouts are inclined to think otherwise. That's the main cabin on the right. The other's the guest cabin. She said supper before him and he was about to make up a bed, but he told her he was accustomed to sleeping on his buffalo robe on the floor. Retired to the guest cabin and servants to their stable.
Exterior, grinder's stand, night, flashback sequence. Hooting of an owl, the cabin shrouded in darkness. A gunshot shatters the stillness. Pause. Another gunshot. Interior, main cabin, night, continuous. Mrs. Grinder, 37, checks the crossbar to be certain the door is secured. Puts an ear to the door, listening. Lewis cries out.
Please, madam, will you give me water and heal my wounds?
Mrs. Grinder steps hastily away from the door, colliding with the table. A tin cup clatters to the floor. Exterior, grinder's stand, day, present time. Clark gives Cooper a questioning look.
He asked her to heal his wounds?
Aye. Not what you expect from a man set on killing himself, is it? Come first light, she sent her children to fetch the servants. She said he died just as the sun rose above the trees.
Did he say anything?
She says he asked for a drink of water. Said, I'm no coward, but I am so strong, so hard to die.
The man who was traveling with him, this James Neely, he said the governor shot himself in the head and the breast.
The first ball grazed his forehead, second below the heart, and at a downward angle. Come out of the base of the backbone. Don't seem likely a man would shoot himself in that manner, does it?
But if he was awakened by an intruder, he was lying on his buffalo robe on the floor. The intruder fired on him, the first shot grazing him in the dark, The second at a downward angle as he rose up.
That's about the way I see it. And he wouldn't have been the first guess at Grinders to discover he'd been robbed while he slept.
James Kneifl neglected to return certain personal effects. Among them, the custom-made pistols he stated the governor turned upon himself.
Kneifl's right fond of them pistols. Carries them with him constantly. Claims he'd loaned the governor money. Kneifl, Mrs. Grinder, the governor's servant, all three said the governor was, at times, deranged in mind. Exact same words. Like they got together and rehearsed what they was going to say.
A very important man was dead, and something very wrong about the way he died. But if they said he killed himself...
Aye. I remember Kneifl set the colored boy digging the grave. Come over to see what he was doing, and proper job of it. He looks at me and says, "It was a bad thing happened here." I said, "Yes, it was."
My God, to think of all he went through out there only to return to the civilized world. To die in Tennessee.
I reckon you're one of them went to the Pacific with him?
Yes.
It was a right wondrous thing you did. We figured for sure you all died out there.
But for him we would have. He'd thought of everything. Like having our powder sealed in lead canisters that could be melted down to provide the exact number of bullets for the powder they contained.
I expect you're wanting to pay your respects in private.
What do I owe you for your time and trouble?
You don't owe me nothing. I'll be right proud to shake your hand.
They shake hands. Cooper reaches in his pocket, takes Clark's hand, and places 2 coins in it. Clark looks at him questioningly.
He had these on him. I reckon they was overlooked in his pocket.
Cooper mounts up.
You'd best not tarry long. Be dark soon.
Cooper nods to Clark and rides away. Clark looks at the coins, closes his fingers over them, looks at the grave. Weeping, he goes to his knees as though struck.
Thomas Jefferson was convinced Lewis had killed himself. And so great was his influence that no official investigation was ever conducted into Lewis's death.
Interior, sick room, day. William Clark, 68, lies propped against pillows. Clark's niece, 48, looks on as Dr. Bernard Farr, 64, places a monaural stethoscope against Clark's chest. Dr. Farrar sets an ear against it, listens.
It's been nigh on 30 years since I went looking for Lewis's grave. The doctor comes frequently to listen to my heart, for which he awards himself a generous fee.
Dr. Farrar returns the stethoscope to his satchel, gives Clark's niece a veiled look, and leads her aside, speaks softly.
Does your uncle have his affairs in order?
Yes, he's made out his will, but he informed us he wishes to be buried in sight and sound of the Mississippi.
All his years in public service. Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Brigadier General, Governor of Missouri Territory. I expect it will be the biggest funeral St. Louis has ever seen.
Dr. Farrar notices a gold-framed miniature of Lewis on the bureau. He takes it up, looks at it. That's Governor Lewis, my uncle. Had a great love for him. He never believed he committed suicide. Dr. Farrar nods, sets the miniature back on the bureau, glances at Clark.
All that can be done is to keep him as comfortable as possible.
Dr. Farrar exits, followed by Clark's niece. Distant clatter of dishes, rattle of silver. You will prepare a broth for Master Clark. He prefers it lightly salted.
Yes, and Mrs. Shane.
Hadn't it have been for Lewis, I'd have died a long time ago. He tended us when we were ailing, fixed us when we bled. He said once a hero is someone who's weak in the knees, yet doing what he knows has to be done. I also remember what I said to him. I said, the world isn't always kind to its heroes.
A ray of sun slants through the window, striking the miniature of Lewis. Clark lies looking at it. Kitchen sounds echo and fade into silence. Growing sound of the river, men's voices, laughter, call of a go-shock. Interior log cabin, day. An old black man lies beneath a worn patchwork quilt. A newspaper reporter stands with pad and pencil. The old man's grandson and wife and their small daughter look on. The little girl holds a corn shuck doll. Super, 40 years later.
What I say? You gonna put it in the newspaper for the white folks to read?
Yes.
How it come about was, Master Kneifl, he tell me he'd help with the man's trunks. He was very important man, Governor Lewis they call him.
The small girl starts crooning softly to her doll. Her mother yanks warningly on her braid.
I was supposed to sleep in the stable, but it was hot, so I got to go lie outside behind the governor's cabin. After a bit, I hears the governor saying, "Pernay, is that you?"
Pernay.
"Yes, sir. That's what he called a servant." Then I hears gunshots and somebody go running past me down. Don't see me lying there. After a bit, I hears the governor go to the lady's door. He asked her, would she give him some water and heal his wound?
The pencil goes still. The reporter looks up.
He asked her to heal his wounds.
Yes, sir. But the lady, she don't pay him no mind. Come morning, they go look and see he's dead. He won't. I hears him talking.
What did he say?
The old man's eyes fill with tears.
He say hard to die.
The reporter's pencil darts across the page.
Long time now I be telling it. Governor Lewis, he was murdered at that place they call Grinder Stand. But nobody listened to an old black man. It won't right. It won't right them saying he killed himself. Just won't right.
Exterior, along the Missouri, evening. Crozet plays his fiddle, Shannon leading the men in a song. Floyd scoops up sand, dribbles it over Pryor's head. Brushing at his hair, Pryor looks back at him. Floyd inclines his head toward York, implying that York did it. Floyd's prank hasn't gone unnoticed by Lewis and Clark. They exchange amused looks. Super. The Lewis and Clark expedition has been described as the most perfect achievement of its kind in the history of the world. Thomas Jefferson said it was as though all of Lewis's qualities had been selected and implanted by nature for that one express purpose. In 1848, a broken marble column was erected over Lewis's grave to symbolize the untimely end of a life of great endeavor and achievement. Fade out.